A good sequel builds upon the foundation of its predecessor, while offering a fresh and unique experience. It expands the world, the characters, and raises the stakes, all while remaining true to the core elements that made the original so successful. Before we begin this video, I want you to remember this quote. Store it somewhere in the back of your mind and come back to it at the end of every section of this video. The Stalker series always fascinated me, not only in its technological aspect, but also in its unique game design and gameplay. Stalker is one of those games that open an entire new genre to me. The immersion, horror, and survival are the main aspects I like about Stalker games. But when I played Stalker 2, all of those features were missing or poorly done. And that's why today I'll be comparing Stalker 2 to not only its predecessors, but also to other games of the same genre. To prove that Stalker 2 is worse than the original trilogy, worse than Shadow of Chernobyl, Call of Pripyat, and even Clear Sky. Okay, no, let's not get too carried away. Worse than the majority of the original trilogy. This is why Stalker 2 is the biggest disappointment and one of the worst sequels I've ever seen. Before we start, I just want to say that I have over 200 hours in Stalker, and if it was absolutely abysmal, I wouldn't play it for so long. There are some aspects I like about Stalker 2, but they are very few and far between. After my first playthrough, I thought the game had some flaws, but wasn't that bad. Only after replaying the original trilogy, I realized that Stalker 2 doesn't simply lack a couple of features from previous games like A-Life, it shouldn't even be considered as part of the Stalker series. This video will be divided into numerous sections. All the timecodes can be found in the description. Also, if you've already seen some sections of this video that were uploaded as videos, don't skip them, as I've considered your feedback when re-editing them. Let's start off with the most noticeable feature, which are the game's graphics. One of the most important components of a game are the visuals, as they set the tone of the entire game. A simple change in the color grading can make a huge difference. Now, the original trilogy had a very unique visual style. In case you didn't know, the graphics of the game have been created using photos. Now, the logical question everyone has is, why does the game look so bad? And that's because of two main factors. The resolution of the photos wasn't really good at the time, and when applying these textures onto an object, they were becoming extremely stretched and thus looked very goofy. But nonetheless, despite looking rather janky, the textures gave off this feeling of a harsh, real-life environment. The rusty metal stairs, the broken stone tiles, the old Soviet cars, everything gave off this feeling of a lost world. I think Stalker managed to portray this post-Soviet reality very well, with the majority of once bustling and active buildings now abandoned and decayed. Stalker is the type of game that, despite feeling rather alien and strange with numerous anomalies and monsters, still manages to feel very cozy and comforting at some points. And one of the main ways this feeling is conveyed is via the visuals of the game. Every texture in the trilogy has this gritty look to it, which fits the game really well, as it is set in a contaminated area that's been left to rot for decades. Of course, this feeling is absent from Stalker 2. Now, I don't think that the visuals before were better, but despite that, I'm still getting comments under some of my videos that Stalker Gamma looks better than Stalker 2, which can't be the case because it's made on Unreal Engine 5. Is what I thought before replaying Stalker Gamma, and I totally agree that a mod for a 15-year-old game looks better than the sequel. Now, I know that a huge amount of people despises Anomaly in various mods for it, which is still a mystery to me, but in this section I will only talk about the game's graphics. Most of the incredible visuals are due to the grass and lighting. I've especially set the tone of my game to be very vibrant and colorful. Of course, you can say that this doesn't look like Stalker but more like Tarkov, and I understand that the original trilogy had a rather dead and rotten nature, but having the outside of the game set in summer creates a much more sudden contrast when entering the tunnels of various labs. Nature is a very important part of the Stalker map, as it is almost everywhere. Greenery like bushes and flowers allow the game to underline this beauty of nature. Stalker 2 has barely any good-looking nature, even when compared to the original trilogy. The Red Forest had huge trees covering the sky, Radar had an entire dead forest, and in Stalker 2 all we get are a bunch of bushes and tiny trees. Garbage had an entire alleyway of trees around the road. In Stalker 2, they're all gone. Gamma looks better than Stalker 2, mostly thanks to various effects like the angry skies after an emission or the sunlight breaking through bushes on a peaceful morning. The effects during an emission are also very well done. You can genuinely feel the destructive nature of this phenomenon. But even if these effects and absolutely gorgeous grass weren't here like it is in Call of Pripyat, Stalker 2 would still look bad in comparison. This is mostly because Stalker 2 looks flat. Not only because there are barely any hills and elevated areas, but also because the image lacks volume. Ray tracing appears to be completely absent from the game, alongside dynamic shadows, making campfires look very basic and uninteresting. Grass doesn't have any shadows, making it look extremely flat. The same point applies to the flashlight. It looks abysmal, there aren't any shadows and the range paired with the power are extremely weak. The worst part is that after a patch that added these so-called dynamic shadows, they're still absent. The shadows you see are fake, they're not dynamic and definitely not ray traced. The lighting also appears to behave very strangely. The illumination of the room changes depending on where you look. For the game, if the light is covered, it doesn't exist. This creates tons of visual problems and just makes the game look awful. Every time I try to get a good shot, I get those annoying pesky little artifacts on the screen that ruin the entire footage. Overall, the lighting and shadows are extremely important factors that pretty much define how a game looks. Sure, Stalker 2 has some cool looking cinematic moments, but they are very rare. One point that's very important to me is that I didn't try to make Anomaly look good. I didn't try to set the theme and the camera angle, I just decided to take some screenshots. And if you don't believe me, ask my viewers. Under my All Mutants and All Factions video, I kept getting comments asking for my custom mod pack, because of how good it looks. Speaking of which, don't worry, I will make a video about my mods and how to install them. The point I'm trying to make is that my goal in these videos wasn't to make the game look good, it was just to show some locations and enemies. In Stalker 2, to get a good looking shot, you have to try to get the right weather at the right time. And another final factor you have to consider is that my Gamma version, all of the footage you're seeing right now, is outdated. Because I'm playing on 091 and the newest version is 0931. I'm 3 versions late. And after seeing the footage from these new versions, I'm absolutely blown away. The fact that a 15-year-old game can look better than the sequel is just baffling to me. Stalker 2, without any exaggeration, looks worse than its 15-year-old half-brother. But I'm not done yet. These were features I've noticed only after replaying the original and Anomaly. But there's one more flaw in the graphics that I've noticed right away when playing the game. It's pixelated. I can genuinely see pixels on my screen. Half-Life 1 has better graphics. Why do the shadows look so bad? What is happening with the water droplets on my gun? I'm on the highest settings right now. On some objects, the rain looks like some white noise. The main problem with the water falling on the gun is that it just spawns on top of the weapon. It doesn't look like it's falling from the sky. And now let's compare this to Gamma, where the effects actually look good and, most importantly, believable. But the worst part is that Stalker 2 has some interesting and truly immersive moments. For example, during a storm, lightning genuinely strikes the ground around the player. You can get hit by lightning, but it wouldn't deal any damage, but the fact that this is even a possibility is mind-blowing. The gigantic red cloud spewing out lightning during animation looks beautiful. Visual features like these are very impressive, but they barely make a difference when considering the entirety of the game's graphics. Furthermore, the game's LODs are messed up. They can load right in front of you, which ruins the immersion and looks extremely cheap. In the original, this was avoided by using fog to hide objects spawning in. I can talk about the visuals of the games for a long time, but you can clearly see how drastically they changed between the trilogy and the sequel. Thanks to Unreal Engine 5, Stalker 2 has lost its unique aesthetic, and now just looks like a regular AAA game made on Unreal Engine 5. I know this section wasn't really detailed and that there are a lot of other videos that go much more in depth regarding the graphics of the game. Personally, I don't really care about the graphics of the game, if the gameplay is good. I mean, I played The Binding of Isaac and Project Zomboid. But one thing I absolutely can't stand are the various visual glitches and artifacts that appear on the screen. I've already mentioned the white noise during the rain, but there are many examples of this that make it really hard for Stalker 2 to look good. Now let's discuss another part that affects the visuals of the game, which is the UI. The important part when talking about an immersive game like Stalker is to not do too much. Thankfully, the health, ammo and item icons are quite small and fade away if not used, which is a nice touch and definitely makes the screen cleaner. But of course, GSC had to ruin everything by adding a compass at the top. Why? This is horrendous and it certainly has nothing to do in this game. I know that some people will tell me that every other Stalker game had a minimap, and that is true, but first of all, it was in the corner and not in the middle of the screen. And secondly, it didn't show enemies. Whenever you enter combat, a red indicator appears. Not only is this overpowered, but it also removes the scare factor from Stalker. The reason why the Stalker series works so well as a horror game is because there weren't any screamers, and in reality, the various mutants and enemies were scaring the player. In Stalker 2, it is impossible for a mutant to sneak up behind the player and attack by surprise. One of the strong points of the games, which was generating lots of memorable moments, is completely absent from Stalker 2. Another very noticeable change in the UI is how the PDA takes up your entire screen. Now, to be honest, we've already seen this in other Stalker games like Call of Pripyat, but here it's much more noticeable, as the character brings his PDA up to his nose as if he was burying his face in it. Of course, I can bring up the way this has been remade in mods, but instead I will use Shadow of Chernobyl as an example. Despite not interacting with your fingers, you can still see what's happening behind it, and also there's no cringy fade to black transition. I really expected the PDA to be somewhat similar to the one in various mods, as it looks much more immersive. I especially like how it interacts with its surroundings, becoming wet during the rain or glitching during an emission. And if you think this is some super complicated new technology that will be too difficult for people to understand, many other games utilize these types of maps. In the forest, you hold a real paper map. In the Metro series, you also hold a map in your hands. Unfortunately, all of this is missing from Stalker 2, and this ugly transition doesn't help it. As you'll see in the future, Stalker 2 lost quite a few immersive and atmospheric elements like this one, but the visuals aren't everything. The sound design of a video game is also very important for creating a truly immersive experience, and the trilogy has an incredible sound design. The soundtrack of the Stalker games was always unique. It has this feeling of grief and loneliness that no other game's OST could convey. Every composition became an absolute banger. Despite what you might think, the greatness of these songs isn't due to nostalgia. The main factor is the way this music makes you feel. It really immerses you into this dark and gloomy world. Furthermore, each piece of music was unique. If I play something like Sad, or Radwind, you will immediately recognize it. Each song has its special features alongside a completely new and unique theme to it. A game with a similar soundtrack is Dying Light. The same passages are repeated across different songs, but they never get boring because they sound different and are mixed up in different ways. The entire soundtrack of the game has its unique theme to it that makes it stand out from others. Here's what I mean. The same situation is with the Stalker games. Not only is the game's music unique, but it's also genius in terms of game design and world building. Let's use Call of Pripyat as an example. The main character of the game, Major Degtyaryov, was a citizen of Pripyat before he had to evacuate. Then he gets a mission to go back to Pripyat to find out the real reason Operation Fairway failed. And here the soundtrack is absolutely insane. A man comes back to his childhood town that is now completely ravaged and destroyed, which is underlined by the soundtrack, but he still remembers how he lived in this town, and this feeling of nostalgia is enforced by the soundtrack, as sometimes you can feel slight glimpses of the past, radio transmissions, or even voices of the people who used to live here. The real Call of Pripyat. Furthermore, when going outside at night, you hear the fainted memories of the disaster. You can hear the screaming sirens, the glaring lights of the trucks passing nearby at midnight rushing towards the CNPP. It's almost if you were reliving this terrifying night again and again, each day you spent in this town. A truly horrifying feeling, tapping into the tragedy that was the Chernobyl power plant disaster. Overall, I think the main theme of the Stalker soundtrack is melancholy and nostalgia. The entire world is built around this post-Soviet reality, which gives us a feeling of a lost world, as if entire chunks of various countries just froze in this era. And the best example of this effect is the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Not only are there the classic abandoned warehouses and factories, but also entire rooms with objects are left intact, just as they were left during the evacuation. Furthermore, it allows the game to underline the sheer terror of the Chernobyl disaster, something that Stalker 2 completely ignores, as if the game wasn't set in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Now, as you already noticed, the soundtrack and atmosphere are greatly linked with the in-game world, although I will not talk about it for a rather long time, as after writing the script for the first time, I realized the world and exploration are greatly linked with the game's progression, so it will be in that section instead. Let's get back to the soundtrack. Stalker 2 has numerous atmospheric tracks. Just like in Call of Pripyat, each of them are divided into night and day variations for every location. But they just don't feel the same. I mean, as soon as I saw the soundtrack wasn't composed by Muse or Alexei Amelchuk, I knew it was cooked. The only notable and truly unique track that stays with you after finishing the game is Mass, which was released before Stalker 2 as a teaser. Sure, you have some cool tracks during a cutscene, but they don't affect the game's atmosphere and themes. Overall, the music in the sequel sounds very generic, nothing like in the original. Either way, whether you like it or not, it is certain that Muse and Alexei Aminchuk managed to create a truly special atmosphere for the game that cannot be replicated. Despite what you might think, this doesn't conclude the sound section of this video, as the Stalker games are also very known for having various sound effects playing from time to time while the player is in a specific area. Of course, it's a bit weird to talk about the sound effects of a game, but Stalker is unique in this sense. Depending on the time of day and your current location, random sound effects would play while you are wandering around. Despite being obviously fake and not related to the A-Life encounters, they still played an important role in setting the tone of the game. For example, the sounds of rusty metal pipes and valves in various underground laboratories really made them feel creepy and dangerous. And the strange screams and meowing of the cats made isolated areas like the army warehouses feel more alive and scary. I don't think I need to explain this, but having small sound effects like these make a huge impact on the atmosphere and immersion of the game. And that's exactly why I think it's a huge missed opportunity on the side of Stalker 2. The important part is that these sound effects aren't something difficult to implement. In conclusion, the soundtrack of Stalker 2 is noticeably worse. No, actually not noticeably, because that's the problem with it. You don't even notice that there's a soundtrack because of how basic and simple it has become. Various scary sound effects are completely absent from the game, making it feel much less scary and immersive. This following section is the biggest one and will cover the gameplay aspects of the game. This section also suffered the biggest amount of changes and rewrites, and honestly, I had enough. Every new patch I had to redo the gameplay section, meaning this video will never release if I keep doing this. Either way, I don't think any amount of patching will fix the major problems with the gameplay section. And even if they do somehow get fixed, may this video be a reminder of how the game was 1 year after its release. Let's start by looking at the survival aspect of the game, because Stalker 2 is tagged as a survival shooter, so obviously it should have some well thought out survival elements, right? Just like in previous Stalker games, the player will have to watch out for two main debuffs, hunger and bleeding. In addition, Stalker 2 has also introduced a sleeping status effect. On paper, this sounds good, having to constantly look for food and make sure to get enough sleep while simultaneously paying attention to your radiation and bleed control. But in reality, none of this is present in Stalker 2. First, the hunger mechanic. Before I start talking about the problems with hunger, please answer me, what does hunger do? Have you ever got the hunger debuff and noticed a difference in your gameplay? Well, I sure didn't. Turns out, once you get the hunger debuff, your character regenerates stamina slower. That's the only effect. To be fair, hunger had a similar effect in previous Stalker games, but in addition to decreasing the player's stamina, it also slowly damaged you, making it a much bigger threat. This change makes hunger less of a threat, but more like a minor inconvenience. And I understand that the idea was to make the character feel weakened by hunger, but there are many other ways of implementing this debuff. For example, in Fear and Hunger, this example is definitely not here as an ad for my 2-hour essay about this game. In Fear and Hunger, starvation is divided into 5 different stages, where the first one applies weakness, making you deal less damage. Another example is the Forest. As soon as you start getting hungry, you lose max stamina, affecting you much faster and serving as a greater threat. All of these effects make you stay well fed at all times, instead of ignoring this mechanic and outright forgetting about it. But even if all of these features were implemented, the hunger status would still be broken, because there's too much food in Stalker 2. Every house contains boxes with tons of food, making them feel like the local Carrefour or Walmart for all of you Americans out there. The point is that there are way too many boxes with food everywhere, which not only makes the hunger debuff useless and unnecessary, but also unrealistic, because these houses were abandoned for years. For you to understand, on my second playthrough, I was selling all my food before going outside because I knew I would find some along the way. This is not how a survival post-apocalyptic shooter should be played. Once again, I'm going to use Call of Pripyat as an example, as is the most recent Stalker game. In COP, food was rather rare. The only way you could find it is by looting dead stalkers, stashes, or buying it from traders. In fact, it actually became a habit for me to buy food before going out on an expedition. And this is one important factor that's completely missing from Stalker 2. The fact that you have to plan what routes you're going to take and how much equipment you should bring. Another rather annoying feature is how often your character gets hungry in Stalker 2. Of course, hunger is affected by other items like energy drinks, but even without using these items, you have to use numerous amounts of food items. Despite this increased hunger, you still have enough food thanks to all the crates scattered around in every corner. Of course, I started analyzing other games and why it's not annoying to eat in them. The first feature is that you simply have to eat less often. In addition to eating less often, every time you fulfill your hunger, it's a much more important event as you remove serious debuffs from your character. Eating in survival games feels rewarding because your character becomes stronger by removing negative status effects. So if the debuff for not eating in Stalker was something serious, like having greater recoil or shaking hands while aiming, which taps into the theme of the character getting weakened, it would be a much more important status effect. The hunger system would have been perfect if food was genuinely scarce and was considered as a semi-valuable item. Furthermore, making the character eat only 3 to 4 times a day could simplify the system and also make it less annoying. But in its current state, hunger is a barely noticeable status effect. In case you're wondering, yes, I indeed just dedicated an entire page of text to the hunger mechanic alone. Another status effect that turned out to be very underwhelming, despite being an integral part of the game, was radiation sickness. At first, when I just started playing Stalker 2, I was terrified of radiation. Thanks to previous experiences with Anomaly and the original trilogy, I knew radiation was really dangerous. And it also makes sense that in Chernobyl, your main enemy will be radiation. But in reality, everything turned out to be much less scary. First, let's remember how it was in the old games. Radiation poisoning was decreasing your health. This damage was proportional to the level of debuff, meaning that in highly irradiated locations your health was going down really quickly. Anomaly went even further and made it so you also lose stamina while being irradiated, which made this debuff even deadlier. In previous games, if you were to catch some rads, you had to immediately get rid of them, or else you'll die pretty quickly. Let's just say this status effect has received a couple of changes in the sequel. Now radiation simply doesn't kill you. Well, of course it does, it decreases your health, but very slowly. In addition to killing you slower, radiation also starts damaging you only after a certain threshold, instead of immediately taking effect like in previous titles. This is why when looking at somebody else's gameplay, I was often seeing that they were irradiated and not doing anything about it. Radiation is simply not scary in Stalker 2. It has a barely noticeable effect, and now simply serves as the role of an invisible wall that instantly kills you if you try to go out of the map. And it's a real shame that this debuff is so negligible. Given the context and the location of the game, you would think it would play a much greater role in the gameplay. Especially since the game has 2 visual and 1 auditory indicator for this debuff alone. I mean, if your character gets hungry, there's a little icon displaying the status effect, but if your character is irradiated, the icon is pulsating, your entire screen is covered in artifacts, and the Geiger counter is going crazy. All of this attention for a debuff that barely does anything. But at least it's better than the sleep status effect. This is a completely new debuff that was added in Stalker 2. Now there's a chance you didn't know it existed because it's extremely rare. It took me 40 hours of gaming to start becoming sleepy, and most importantly, I didn't use any energy drinks. Because normally, energy drinks completely disable the sleep debuff. And because Skif chugs more energy drinks than gamers, it becomes impossible for the sleep debuff to actually activate. During my first playthrough, I never got it. But the worst part about the sleep mechanic is that it has no effect. And it's not like with radiation that has an effect only after a certain threshold. No, during my second playthrough, I always had the sleep status effect and it did nothing. In fact, I liked having it because it added those visuals around my screen because it looked like I was wearing a helmet. So we have a debuff that's almost unobtainable and does barely anything. But the worst part is the fact that the sleep status has a noticeable effect, but you can only see it while fighting cats. I really don't get it. Why not copy the effect that the cat gives you? Although even this effect isn't all that good. I mean, your character just blinks from time to time, which is kind of mediocre, but it's at least something. The final status effect I will talk about is bleeding. And just like with every part of this game, it was completely butchered. As you probably remember, in Call of Pripyat we had 4 different levels of bleeding. And just like with radiation, the last level was extremely dangerous and deadly. But as you already realized, all of this is gone from Stalker 2. Instead, we have just one regular status effect that, of course, has extremely negligible effects. Another feature I really didn't enjoy is how bandages heal the player, just like in Shadow of Chernobyl, which is very weird and makes no sense, especially if we consider that the other 2 games, bandages didn't heal the player, which made the game more challenging and more realistic. As in Stalker 2, bandages not only stop bleeding, but also heal back the bleeding damage. This feature trivializes the bleeding status effect, and makes applying bandages a simple chore, because every enemy applies bleeding. Now I won't talk about it too much because in previous games everything was making you bleed, but thanks to the overall gameplay feeling slower, the bleed debuff is considered more like a roadblock that stops you from fighting instead of an actual threat that you need to stop to not die. Now that we talked about the various debuffs in the game, it's time to discuss the healing and stamina systems, as they are also pretty bad. Health is pretty straightforward. If it drops to 0, you die and can be healed using medkits. Only medkits. For some unknown reason, healing artifacts are completely absent from the game, but I'll talk about the artifacts in a different section of the video. For now, I want you to look over the various healing items we have. Obviously, we have the 3 types of medkits at our disposal and 3 pills for certain situations. And that's it. Now, I'm not gonna start yapping about the 20,000 healing items in Gamma that you'll never use, but instead I will use Call of Pripyat as an example. In addition to the previously mentioned 6 consumables, we also had antibiotics, radioprotectants, psyblocks, and antidotes. Each of these items was useful in some situations, because instead of healing radiation or psi damage, they would grant resistances to them. This allowed you to plan ahead your exploration path and stock up on supplies you might need, something that's entirely missing from Stalker 2. Oh yeah, and there's also antibiotics that allow you to survive an emission by putting you to sleep. Overall, thanks to having more useful healing and protective items, you could plan your exploration route better, and it was simply more interesting. The fact that you had to prepare before going into an anomaly, instead of rushing headfirst without even thinking. Speaking of rushing and running, let's talk about how the player's stamina was changed. And before I start analyzing and yapping about how Call of Pripyat was better, I want to show you a small clip which compares the stamina usage in every single Stalker game. All of the characters are running without any equipment, buffs, or artifacts. Notice how fast the stamina in Stalker 2 is used compared to other games in the series. Of course, Stalker 2 came in last place, but that's not all, as the various stamina buffs have been nerfed as well. For example, in COP, yeah, it's getting really tiring to say the same thing over and over again. Anyway, in COP, energy drinks are giving you a stamina buff instead of just filling your stamina. This was much more effective and immersive, as you still had to take a break for your stamina to regenerate. And as if that wasn't bad enough, stamina artifacts were also nerfed to the ground. Remember, in Shadow of Chernobyl, artifacts affected not only how fast stamina regenerates, but also how fast it was used. Which is why you could get a loadout where your stamina could regenerate faster than you could use it.
Still fast as fuck, boy! Come get some. I don't think you have any idea how fast I really am.
And I know it sounds a bit too much, but the effect of reducing stamina usage is completely gone. Instead, artifacts simply accelerate how fast your stamina regenerates. By the way, this is the speed at which your stamina is gained when you're holding the single best stamina artifact in the entire game. Bro, what the hell? And I know what many of you will tell me, chill out, you just have a smaller amount of stamina, it's fine. Because it's not like the map is 10 times bigger than before. Oh fuck. Finally, we can talk about the various locations and their exploration in Stalker 2. But before going into more detail, I want to address the overall problem with the game's map. It's way too big. I mean, it's almost as big as the map of GTA 5. This image I've created shows the locations we've seen in previous games, and what struck me the most is that not only the game has completely new areas, but also already existing locations have gained a considerable amount of playable area. This map also reveals to us that some structures have been swapped around. In addition, some levels have completely changed placements, like Zaton and the swamps. I know that this was made to make the map more similar to the real-life exclusion zone, but because the previous Stalker games were reliant on geographical obstacles like radar with the Brain Scorcher or Limansk with the abandoned hospital, this map makes no sense. For example, the previously mentioned Brain Scorcher stops Stalkers from going to the north towards Jupiter and Pripyat, but in Stalker 2 the lab is on the other side of the map, which means there shouldn't be any point to shut it down. Another reason that negatively affected the exploration in Stalker 2 is the fact that the world is one seamless map. And this is a concern I voiced all the way back in October of 2024. The thing is, the loading screen doesn't just load the next location, it also acts as fast travel. So let's take the transition between Garbage and Restock. Here we have this long pathway and there's nothing interesting happening on this path. So if the world will be seamless, there will be multiple areas like these that contain nothing. So either they have to add new and interesting locations here, or just completely remove these types of areas. And would you guess it? Just as I predicted, nothing was done about this problem, and it makes traveling between different locations uninteresting and boring. And that's also why I haven't marked these locations on my map, as despite being featured on the map, they were inaccessible. But what if I tell you that this image is actually wrong? What if I tell you that the locations in Stalker 2 are much bigger than you might have thought? And that's because the scale of the overall map has been increased. The funniest thing is that I've discovered this completely by accident thanks to the staircase in Rostock. Now, I clearly remember that it was very small, but here it's much bigger. And from this very moment, I've started to notice these scale changes everywhere. Now, of course, you can say that it's a small change, and surely it doesn't affect the overall map size all that much. And if I make a few comparisons, oh my god, what is this size difference? As you can see, multiple areas have gained a considerable size increase, furthermore enlarging the game's map. And this change feels very unnecessary, as if it was an intentional change to make the map seem bigger. In the end, all of these factors add up to make the exploration in Stalker 2 horrendous. First of all, we have an incredibly small stamina bar that is almost twice smaller than in Call of Pripyat. Second, the stamina restoring artifacts have been heavily nerfed, losing their ability to reduce stamina usage. Third, the map of Stalker 2 has become much bigger, featuring tons of new locations. And finally, fourth, the map also became bigger because of an overall increase in the scale of previous buildings and areas. This makes traveling from one point to another extremely dull, especially since quest objectives are most often found kilometers away from you. And almost all the time, while traveling from point A to B in Stalker 2, I was watching a video or working while waiting for my stamina to regenerate. Of course, I don't have to tell you that this is a pretty bad sign, although the world of Stalker 2 is very detailed, featuring many interesting and unique locations. I especially like the various writings on the walls and objects featured in random areas. These are numerous elements of storytelling which makes exploring the world more interesting, as you witness the fate of other less fortunate stalkers. Some of the stashes are like puzzles, featuring unique keys, buttons or doors you have to interact with to unlock them. For example, while looting stashes in Pripyat, I was interested in exploring the area, not only because of the unique stories and locations, but also because every stash was like a small puzzle. I actually had fun searching for keys and following the generator cables to unlock the safe. This is a great improvement when compared to previous iterations of the franchise, as before it was as simple as getting to the marker on the map without thinking. And while that's true, searching for stashes becomes useless towards the end of the game, because after exploring the first few dozens of stashes and seeing the majority of them contain regular resources like ammo, medkits and food, it doesn't make sense to loot them. In previous games you could find unique armor pieces, guns or just powerful healing items. Obviously some stashes contain equipment like weapons and armor, but they are so rare that it doesn't even make sense to search for them. However, some stashes contain unique blueprints that unlock endgame upgrades for weapons and armor, but they also aren't a necessity. I mean, have you ever looked at your weapon upgrades and said, "Oh no, I can't upgrade, guess I'll have to go exploring to find blueprints"? No, only after 60 hours of gameplay did I realize what blueprints did. Overall, looting stashes is extremely unrewarding, giving basic items and only in some very specific places unique guns. But stashes create another major problem in the game's exploration, and I'm talking about the effect they have on the weight system. Now, I haven't mentioned this system when talking about all buffs and debuffs, because it is one of the direct causes that make exploration in Stalker 2 so bad. Just like in previous games, every item in your inventory had a specific weight attached to it. Whether it's an exoskeleton or a simple piece of paper, it will still take up place in your inventory. I obviously like this system as it is simply more realistic, but it's also much more limiting. Because every item has weight, this means that the majority of your equipment like armor, guns and ammo will already take up half, if not more, of your inventory space. This means that you won't be able to bring a lot of items with you, and most of the time you'll be over-encumbered. And I feel like I don't have to explain this because we all had this type of situation when playing Stalker 2. But after looting a couple of crates and stashes, your inventory becomes full due to the enormous amounts of items they give. And it's not like you can throw away some of these items, as the game's economy pretty much forces you to loot every possible corner to make at least some form of profit. My favorite example of this is the Clear Sky base, which is literally in the very corner of the map. Once you get to this remote location, you receive a unique suit, an RPG, lots of other small items and this scanner you came searching for. Obviously, all of these items make you over-encumbered, and the game tells you to walk over a kilometer by foot. Of course, the game gives you one Hercules, but it will run out very quickly. Now, as a person who always found himself over-encumbered in any Stalker game, I started thinking, why wasn't it so bad in the trilogy? First of all, we had points that we already discussed, like a smaller map and better stamina. But another important feature was fast travel. Although fast travel is present in Stalker 2, it is extremely limited. The base of every faction contains a unique guide that can lead you to other bases. Now, these bases are already located kilometers away from each other. But it gets even worse, considering the fact that the more you play, the less faction bases there are. In total, Stalker 2 has 13 faction bases. But near the end of the game, this number goes down drastically. The first base that is destroyed is Icarus. No matter which side you decide to pick, everyone there will still be zombified. During the course of various side quests, Shevchenko and Sultansk merge together. Then, after completing the circus section, the base in Wild Island becomes destroyed. Shortly after, Zalicia gets attacked, and because of a glitch at the time, for me it also got destroyed. Although what's funny is that if you decide to defend Zalicia, the only character who dies there is the guide, so either way this base is useless. The final two bases, this being the chemical plant and Malachite, will get destroyed if you choose the path of any faction that's not the Ward. This leaves us with only 7 faction bases on the entire map, which is twice as less. This sudden decrease in enemy bases makes fast travel redundant, as to simply get to a guide you have to travel over a kilometer. And once again, this problem was absent from Call of Pripyat, because you couldn't find random stalkers that would guide you to a specific location for a small fee. This feature made exploring more interesting and less annoying. So to recap this section of the video, we have an incredibly detailed, handcrafted world, filled with lots of secret and interesting locations. A gigantic map with various areas that's almost a one-to-one replica of the real-life exclusion zone. But on the other hand, we have no incentive to explore this world. A gigantic map with basic stash rewards and a character who gets out of breath after running for 50 meters makes exploring this world feel very dull and almost like a chore. And this is what I hate the most about Stalker 2. The game has some great, genuinely well-made aspects, which are better than in the original trilogy, but because of a bunch of small basic mistakes, this aspect becomes not just bad, but even worse than it was before. Mistakes that could be fixed really easily, that on their own aren't that bad, but when you add up all of these failed features, their problems becomes very apparent. This property, for me, solidifies Stalker 2 as a game with huge lost potential. But while these small mistakes could be fixed rather easily, other poorly done aspects are much more difficult to improve, and I'm talking about the emptiness of the map. The interesting fact about this issue is that the world of previous Stalker games was also rather empty at times, but in the trilogy it was used as an intended design choice. And here we once again move to the atmosphere of the game. Loneliness was always an integral part of the atmosphere of Stalker. The fact that you could wander in a completely desolated and abandoned place without seeing any humans was absolutely terrifying. And when you met a random stalker after going through various anomalies and mutant encounters, you felt relief. The fact that you're not the only one left in this godforsaken world. Stalker really made you fear the zone. And I'm not talking about the various laboratories and basements. No, even simply walking during the day, all alone, was pretty scary. Because at any moment you could get jumped by a mutant and it will be over. In Stalker 2, the only scary part about exploring is when you get attacked by a bunch of enemies and you realize you can't run because the game spawned 5 guns in your inventory. Exploration in Stalker 2 is not scary but boring, because most interesting locations are separated by gigantic plains of nothing. And the worst part is that the exploration doesn't change depending on your environment. Of course, you have missions that force you to take a coffee break, but otherwise exploring the world during daytime is the same as traveling at night, which is just abysmal. Nighttime is supposed to feel scary because this is where you're at your most vulnerable. Your vision is decreased and you can't see the enemy. Of course, you can tell me that nighttime in Stalker was never scary. And that's right, it was absolutely terrifying. The idea of a strong and truly gigantic, impossible to understand force called the Zone towering over you was absolutely incredible. Although this effect is purely psychological, in reality there isn't much that can kill you, and that's why I find the change Anomaly introduced to be very fitting, as during nighttime numerous dangerous mutants come out of their holes to hunt, most notably bloodsuckers, which makes total sense and should be in the game, to be honest. This would have made nights more dangerous and as a result would have improved the aspects of planning future explorations. I've already touched this aspect in the part about status effects, but this section further expands on that. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever slept in Stalker 2? And it's not to get rid of the non-existent sleep debuff. No, I mean, have you ever thought to yourself, oh no, it's nighttime already, I better sleep before going out of the safe zone? No, because the weather and day and night cycles do not affect how you explore the world. This removes any difficulty from the game and makes it a casual shooter like Far Cry. Okay, chill out, we haven't gotten to this section yet. Overall, the exploration in Stalker 2 is awful, and nothing like in the previous games or other post-apocalyptic survival games. But while this aspect could be fixed with various small patches and additions, there's another problem that is much bigger and is directly connected to the exploration of the world. It is the game's progression. Now, you've most likely seen this meme floating around the Stalker subreddit, and I can't help but agree, as this perfectly describes my experience with the game. Let me demonstrate in the form of a graph. The graph of your enjoyment of the game in function of your playtime. When you play the original Stalker games, let's be honest, your expectations are pretty low. The graphics look weird, the gunplay is aberrant, and the story is mostly poorly written. But then, the more you play, the more you notice those small details that really immerse you into the world, and the overall atmosphere of the zone. Once you're immersed and invested in the game, you start liking it more and more, and finally understand why it's such a legendary game to begin with. The situation with Stalker 2 is the complete opposite. You enter the game with excitement, knowing that this is the continuation of the truly legendary Stalker franchise, and then, the more you play, the more details you notice. But this time, there's only negative. And I'm not talking about the various glitches, but real poorly made design choices, some of which we've already looked over. So your enjoyment of the game suddenly starts going down, and this is why the current reviews of Stalker, made after the players fully completed the game and story, are pretty bad, as people see those poor design choices, and one of them is the emptiness of the endgame. Don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about the emptiness as in the absence of various interesting locations, but as in the extreme lack of content. Stalker 2 has a total of 22 areas. Some of them we've already seen while others are completely new. Now, I want you to guess how many of these you have to visit to complete the main quest. 17 out of 22. And if we don't count areas where you don't spend more than a couple of hours, this number will go down even further. We spent only around 30 minutes fighting at the cooling towers. The burnt forest is visited for only one single location, and most of your time being there is spent in a lab. Same thing goes for the generators. You never get to go outside and actually see the generators if you're going for STRELOK'S or Kaimanov's endings. Pripyat, despite being the most beautiful and interesting location of the game, filled with iconic and memorable places, has only 2 main quests and no side quests. Shadow of Chernobyl sends its regards. This leaves us with only 13 locations that were more or less explored. But that's not all, as we don't take into consideration merged locations like the fact that the chemical plant is composed of Agroprom and the army warehouses. So that's why I want you to look at this map. Every number represents the amount of side quests a certain location has, and this is absolutely insane. As we can see, the first few locations are filled with interesting and memorable encounters and quests, which create the illusion of a busy world where something is constantly happening, and hence why the game during those few hours feels complete and enjoyable. But then the more you start exploring the rest of the game, you realize that there's almost nothing to do, and despite its enormous size, the world has barely any interesting activities. This drastically decreases the game's sense of exploration and replay value, as there are less things to do and less interesting encounters. You have been watching this video for almost an hour and you're still not subscribed. Make sure to subscribe because less than 1% is crazy, bro. And the worst part is that most of these side quests are just regular encounters where you have to kill a random mutant or enemy. The only memorable side quest was the one with the Callers because of its epic ending. Meanwhile, in Call of Pripyat, every quest was unique, memorable, and affected other missions. But that doesn't mean regular fetch quests aren't important. These types of quests aren't useless. For example, Dying Light has a lot of fetch quests, but they're important as the player learns the layout of the map while completing them, so they can easily traverse it. The same way some simple fetch quests could guide the player to a different location. And while he was completing this quest, he might go explore other interesting locations and stashes found nearby, essentially nudging the player to explore a specific area that otherwise could have been ignored. This is basic game design, why do I have to explain this? I guess the developers hoped that stashes would fill the same role of pushing the player to explore a different area, but as we already discussed, stashes are extremely underwhelming and unrewarding, which makes players skip them most of the time. The in-game world feels completely empty, especially in the endgame. Extremely important and legendary locations like Pripyat, the Red Forest or Jupiter have barely anything interesting. The worst part is that the most interesting locations can't even be accessed. The CNPP can't be visited as it is protected by a giant kill barrier. The generators can only be witnessed by the people stupid enough to choose the bad ending. The famous city of Limansk isn't even shown on the map. I understand that these locations will be featured in future DLCs, but the fact that the most important areas aren't even accessible to the player is just baffling to me. The most disappointing part about the endgame being extremely rushed is not only the fact that we can't properly explore a handcrafted, extremely detailed version of the zone, but also because we can't try out the majority of powerful equipment we find in those areas. If you watched my video on the most powerful equipment in the zone, you might remember that the majority of the best exoskeletons and guns can be found in Pripyat. Let's take the Journalist stash for example. It gives you 2 endgame guns with unique skins and attachments, and a custom exoskeleton. The Saiga shotgun and the sniper rifle are both very good weapons, not only in terms of damage but also thanks to their unique skins and attachments. But the problem is that you get these guns 2 hours before the end of the game, after which you will be thrown to the main menu, not allowing you to play further. And even if you don't have access to the Journalist stashes, this place still contains a unique weapon for you to try out. Let alone the fact that in Pripyat you can obtain the legendary Ghost Rifle for you to use this weapon for only 2 hours. Of course, some of you might say that because of the extreme strength this weapon has, it should be accessed only in Pripyat. And to that I will respond by showing you a clip of a Monolithian running around with a Ghost Rifle in Yanov, before I got access to Pripyat. And it's not like letting you keep on playing after beating the story will fix this problem, as there is no quest for you to do and thus barely any ways to try out the new guns. Because of this extreme lack of side quests compared to the first locations of the game, the rest of it feels unfinished and extremely empty. And this is not necessarily the fault of the developers not adding enough quests, but more the way quests function has been redone, which introduces us to a new section of this video, questing. The numerous missions you could complete in Stalker were always a key factor for me. I still, to this day, think that Shadow of Chernobyl had one of the best questing systems of all time. The game makes sure that you have something to do at all times, not only thanks to the various NPCs interacting with each other thanks to a life, but also thanks to the various quests you can complete. Shadow of Chernobyl was following this really quick and fast-paced gameplay route that I haven't seen in other games. Each trader has 3 or 4 quests to offer, and the best part is that you could start each of these quests. Meanwhile in Stalker 2, traders offer 3 tasks, but only one of each can be chosen. Furthermore, only in Shadow of Chernobyl, whenever you enter a new location, you get a quest to destroy a mutant lair. This ensures that you have something to do at all times. Furthermore, repeatable quests would respawn much faster than they do in Stalker 2. The entire gameplay was very fast-paced. Let's take the arena as an example. In the first Stalker game, you could compete in each challenge one after the other without any cooldown. Meanwhile in Stalker 2 you have to wait for 2 real-life minutes for the arena to become available again. And you would probably say that this feature was implemented so the player can't complete every arena battle in one sitting. But the thing is, Shadow of Chernobyl stopped you from progressing further if your rank was too low. Remember when everyone had ranks and an entire leaderboard with all the NPCs? Good times. Basically, the entire gameplay loop of Stalker was very quick. As soon as you finished a fight, you could start another. As soon as you enter a location, you have a quest to complete. Not only was this system interesting, but it was also extremely addicting. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious which game is my favorite out of the series. This gameplay loop is one of the main reasons why I love Gamma so much, because it also has this gameplay loop where you take some quests, then while doing those quests you stumble onto other NPCs and traders who give you other quests, and at the end you realize that you've been doing side missions and garbage for 15 hours. And one question I always had is, why do you never get tired of this type of gameplay? Why instead of getting stale and repetitive, you become more and more addicted to this kind of playstyle? I think this is mostly due to the way those tasks were generated. You see, when a game was giving you a mission to, let's say, kill a group of mutants or bandits, it would scan the area for those targets. Maybe those targets are stationary, or going somewhere thanks to the A-Life system, but once the game found this group, they were selected as targets. But if the game didn't find any enemies in the current area, or the group of wandering bandits transitions to another level, then the game would tell you to go to the adjacent level instead. When you picked up a quest in Stalker, it didn't spawn any new enemies. The game simply selected a group of foes driven by A-Life and let the magic happen. This guaranteed that every encounter and every task would feel unique thanks to the extremely advanced A-Life system. So despite not being well written and planned out like they were in Call of Pripyat, these small side quests still managed to be as exciting and as interesting as directed ones. Now, the fact that I've been saying everything in the past tense should have already warned you that this is obviously not the case in Stalker 2. Instead, the game simply spawns in a bunch of enemies you have to kill. This not only makes quests very boring, but it also shows the extreme lack of variety. I mean, after doing around 4 repeatable side quests in Garbage, I already managed to memorize the spawn points of all bandit groups I had to kill. Overall, repeatable side quests have become only a shadow of themselves. Having huge respawn times and very few variations, they became extremely boring. But they could have been much better if Stalker 2 had different NPCs. Yes, we finally got to this section of the video. Now, if you think that the only feature Stalkers lack is A-Life, you are mistaken, because the amount of missing features and details is just astonishing. When discussing NPCs in Stalker 2, everyone considers A-Life to be the biggest problem. And while that is correct, many other missing features get ignored and forgotten about. So instead, we're going to start with these absent details and slowly make our way up to the biggest problems of NPCs in Stalker 2. First of all, let's talk about the NPC skins. Remember how in previous games every faction member had their own unique skins, allowing you to determine immediately who's hostile towards you and who's not? No? Well, GSC neither. Now every enemy looks the same. Bandits and Stalkers are often seen wearing similar outfits, making it harder for you to understand who's your enemy. The same problem applies to Freedom and the military. Sure, they're supposed to both use camouflage, but in the sequel they look completely identical. Of course, you can say that this is a problem only at the beginning of the game, and that later on you get used to it. So here's a clip 3 hours before the end of the game. I genuinely have no idea who to shoot. NPCs look so similar, it's insane. And funny enough, the more you play, the more apparent this problem becomes. Because at the end of the game, every character will be wearing the same exact exoskeleton. You can clearly notice this issue when you visit the Rookie Village, where every single NPC has an exosuit. In the Rookie Village. Despite numerous patches that were supposed to fix this issue, the majority of Stalkers wear the same exact exoskeleton, making them look completely identical. It's not normal that in a tactical shooter like Stalker 2, you need to get out of cover and wait for the enemies to start shooting. Because otherwise you'll be killing Stalkers from allied factions, ruining your reputation. Although even this system is flawed. Faction relations are very poorly done in Stalker 2. My favorite and probably only good feature from Clear Sky were the faction wars. And while this system had numerous flaws, it was still an interesting aspect of a life I wanted to see improved upon in Stalker 2. But compared to the sequel, even Clear Sky is good. The first important point was that you had a special tab in your PDA that allowed you to track ongoing conflicts between factions in some areas. And you could push enemies out of these areas, helping another faction get the upper hand and secure the entire perimeter, winning the conflict. This feature was amazing as it allowed the player to directly influence the geopolitics of the zone. Furthermore, you could join factions such as Freedom and Duty, picking your side in the conflict and determining who gets what territories. And the best part is that all of this content was completely optional. You didn't have to join any faction to complete the main story. Although it was a very useful activity, as your reputation level with a faction affected the items sold by traders from that faction, something that's completely missing from Stalker 2. The game also tried to somewhat replicate the choice of faction, giving you an option between Duty on steroids and Freedom but cooler. But in the end, it doesn't change the population of the Stalkers and what areas are controlled by what faction. In fact, it's completely impossible to exterminate an enemy's base. The moment you start shooting, the doors get locked and you can't do anything. But that's not the worst part. The real problem comes from the fact that faction bases are guarded by invincible enemies. One interesting feature of the Stalker games was that every NPC was killable. No one had infinite health. Everyone was as vulnerable to the zone as you. I still remember this moment when a group of mercs killed a bunch of NPCs in our stock, including the arena guy. He was an important NPC, but despite that he still died. Of course, the mega important traders were invulnerable, but if you wanted to, you could decimate the entirety of our stock, like some sort of base raid. In Stalker 2, you can't even do that, as every faction base is guarded by an immortal enemy. Here's one in the Rookie Village, another at the chemical plant, and there's also this monolithian at the edge of the map. This really surprised me. Stalker was known for having more mortal NPCs than other games, and the fact that all of a sudden we get an immortal soldier whose sole purpose is to guard areas you're not supposed to be at is just astonishing. Another way NPCs lost their individuality is with the simplification of their voice lines. If you remember, in previous games, every member of a faction had their own unique vocabulary tied to their origins and views. These voice lines became entire memes, gaining popularity even outside of the Stalker fanbase. I strictly remember how in one of the trailers for Stalker 2 we've heard the bandit say his iconic, and from that very moment, I looked for anything remotely similar to this voice line, but found nothing. Then I said to myself, well, I'm playing in English, made for the Western player base, so after switching to Ukrainian, there's still nothing. What I'm trying to say is that Stalkers lost their charm because of those missing voice lines. Unique vocabulary and expressions help to differentiate factions from each other, showing that even in terms of language, they're different. Not only was this a simply cool detail, but it also added a lot of story and personality to NPCs. A very notable example of this were the last words of Stalkers. They were different for every faction member. Bandits would curse the killer, surprisingly fitting for them. Dutiers would accept their fate, and freedomers would call for help from their friends. But the most tragic last words belonged to Lunars, simply calling for their mothers during their last moments. This is an amazing feature, paired with the fact that enemies actually lie down and moan in pain while trying to call for help creates a very tragic moment. You genuinely feel bad about killing Stalkers, which solidifies this idea of a grey moral often found throughout the zone. I don't think I even have to compare this to the sequel, but fine, let's do it. Not only do enemies spit out regular basic phrases during combat, but they also have barely any reaction to dying. I mean, the subtitles just say dies, which is so funny. But despite being rather amusing, it creates the exact opposite effect than in the original trilogy. You genuinely don't care about their deaths. There is no emotional attachment to the NPCs because you can clearly see that they're empty shells without any personality. Another small feature I've only remembered when editing is that upon killing a Stalker in previous games, they would still hold their gun while dying. Moreover, they would pull the trigger, making them fire in random directions, which was making the deaths of any Stalker even more dramatic and cinematic in a way. In the original trilogy, Stalkers often talked with each other. For example, after a Stalker finished playing on his guitar, others would react to it. Some would find it great, meanwhile other individuals might have a different opinion. This really made Stalkers special. They had different opinions and views regarding the same situation. Yet another feature that was really poorly done in Stalker 2. NPCs barely even talk to each other, and the things they say sound so fake it's better they just stayed silent.
Лежу на карточку и думаю, господи, хорошо-то как.
One change that really bothers me are the Monolithian voice lines. At first glance, you might think that they're pretty faithful to the original, but the intonation is strange. It sounds like Monolithians try to speak with a robotic voice. I get that in the original trilogy they always had the same intonation, but there it was the intonation that people use in a regular conversation. This created a strong contrast between the meaning of the sentence, eradicate the enemy of the monolith, and the casual intonation that you would normally use while speaking with your friend. Despite having the same idea, Monolithians in Stalker 2 sound like a robot from that one video game. I know that compared to other problems this is just nitpicking, and that most of you didn't even notice it, but it's something that really irritates me for some reason. Since we started talking about phrases used in combat, let's cover the entirety of it. The NPCs in Stalker always had a unique style of battle, different from other enemies in similar games. The most prominent and memorable feature was their ability to sneak up on other enemies. Stalkers could crouch and silently come up to their enemies and take them by surprise. This was an amazing feature, which further enhanced the world and enemy AI. I think the best Stalker combat was in Clear Sky, as the entire game was focused on faction wars. Stalkers used numerous positions when fighting. They could go prone, move from one hiding spot to another, push forward, or retreat when the situation gets too heated. This creates dynamic and incredibly interesting and intense battles between both Stalkers and Mutants alike. Another feature that was bringing Stalkers to life is their reaction to getting shot. We've already discussed the audio aspect with them screaming numerous insults or begging to be saved by others, but the body itself also reacts to damage. In fact, aiming for the heads of your enemies wasn't really necessary, as the various unique animations used by Stalkers when getting hit could be used as an opening for a finisher. The way the system was done in Stalker 2 is just abysmal. Not only do Stalkers not scream any obscenities towards you or call for help, they don't even stop to acknowledge the fact that they're getting hit. Furthermore, in previous games, Stalkers could use various different tactics while fighting, making combat unique and unpredictable. Once again, we all know this aspect is worse in Stalker 2, but I think you don't understand to what extent. Stalkers in the sequel have no strategy. All they do is push towards each other without stopping. They don't try to use bushes or trees as cover in a field. Hell, they can barely use any cover whatsoever. Even after the patch 1.4 that was supposed to fix this issue, I often see Stalkers just standing in one spot shooting each other. Of course, if NPCs can't hide from bullets, they surely can't do any more sophisticated strats of sneaking or doing a tactical retreat. Although the extreme stupidity of the AI is compensated by their extreme aimbot. NPCs can get a hit on you from 50 meters away while using a shotgun. They can fire through obstacles to kill you and snipe you once a mere molecule of your body leaves cover. Paired with every attack applying bleeding, this creates a very boring and repetitive gameplay loop. Come out of cover, shoot the enemy, then retreat to heal, over and over again. Now that we've looked over the NPC combat, let's discuss the other important aspects of the NPCs. Don't worry, it doesn't get any better. In my first draft, I also included a stealth section when talking about combat, but stealth wasn't really prominent in the OG games to begin with. So all I'm going to say is that stealth in Stalker 2 is completely broken. Enemies do not care about anything that's happening. You can shine a flashlight in their face, you can open doors right in front of them, you don't even have to sneak for them to not notice you. Stealth is beyond broken, and here are some clips to demonstrate exactly what I mean. The NPCs aren't just blind, they're also deaf and probably autistic. This clip perfectly demonstrates how bad the AI is in Stalker 2. So obviously I run in front of these guys, they don't even realize I'm here. This is normal, you know, this is fine. But what happens after is the funniest part. So as we can see, this ward soldier is trying to retreat, but he can't because he's stuck in the level geometry, so he dies. Then this one, I don't know what happens, he gets shot and then exits combat and starts doing his idling pose. So I don't know what happened. Maybe I shot him so hard he got amnesia or something. The second guy as well uses no cover, just goes straight towards me. Amazing. Now look what happens here. You heard that? So the ward guy is alerted, but when we go here, he just now pulls out his weapon. Then his scientist, his friend over there, is completely oblivious to everything that's happening. He has no idea that there's a guy screaming, he got shot, doesn't care. This guy is my favorite. Only now does he understand there's an enemy inside. This is insane. Not only did this guy not hear me shooting the guys downstairs, not only did he not hear that ward guy alerting everyone and him getting brutally murdered, but it also takes for him 3 entire seconds to realize there's an enemy in the room. This is insane. This guy probably doesn't even know what universe he's in right now. And like a cherry on top of this carousel of stupidity, this and many other clips were made all on the latest patch 1.4 that was supposed to improve the enemy AI. Now we can finally move on to the way NPCs interact with their surroundings, something that the developers of Stalker 2 consider to be part of A-Life, and thus list these features amongst A-Life improvements. But that is definitely not the case. I've seen so many people make comments like, now Stalkers loot bodies, pick up equipment, mutants eat bodies. But that is not part of A-Life. The way these features are programmed shows no sight of artificial intelligence. The script that makes Stalkers loot bodies is the same one that makes them shoot an enemy. It's extremely basic and has no variety. Stalkers will loot any bodies. They don't care if the stalker got killed by them, the player, or other stalkers. They will still loot the body. Furthermore, when a stalker's corpse is looted, it's looted completely. This is the laziest way to create a looting mechanic. Imagine if instead of grabbing all items like a hoarder, stalkers shows what items they need depending on what they're missing from their inventory, or what they might need in the future. The same thing applies to equipment. NPCs in Stalker 2 can pick up equipment, but once again, they don't know why they're doing that. Stalkers in previous games got better equipment, not because of a line in the code, but because they had an objective to move further, into more dangerous locations for which they'll need better equipment. The actions of Stalkers in the sequel can be compared to a reflex. See an enemy, shoot, see a dead body, loot, see armor, equip it. There is no end goal for the NPCs to follow, to prepare for. The same thing applies to the patch 1.4 mutant eating mechanic. We'll talk about mutants in more detail, but this feature is another example of simple scripts being confused with A-Life. Mutants don't have a hunger bar that they need to refill by eating. They don't need to carry the body in a secure location to eat. They see the body and eat, that's it. One clip that showcases this very well is this one that I've made near the end of the game. I'm in the middle of combat and this monolithian sees a body and goes to loot it. He does not care about me, he does not care that I'm shooting at him or that there's an anomaly in front of him. His only goal right now is to loot the body. I don't really include these scripts as part of A-Life, because they're so basic. But now let's actually talk about the incredible No Life 2.0. The extremely popular A-Life system was always one of the central features of the Stalker series. The unpredictable NPC behavior was creating unique situations, surprising the players even 15 years later. Now, A-Life is nothing but a glorified spawner engine. But before going into more detail about the new A-Life, let's discuss how the old one functioned. Basically, once a certain NPC spawned in, they were given a quest that they had to complete. But before they could tackle this so-called main quest, Stalkers had to make sure they have enough resources such as ammo, food, and good gear. And if they didn't have enough of a certain resource, then they had to complete some other side quests to fulfill the missing items. The main quest of the NPCs would be labeled something as Discover the Secrets of the Zone, and would be impossible to complete. That way NPCs would be always participating in activities and searching to do something in the zone. Of course, this explanation is extremely simplified, but you get what I mean. Although that's not all, as NPCs were active at all times, no matter where you were on the map. The NPCs could exist in two states, online and offline A-Life. Whenever a stalker or mutant was within 150 meters of the player, they would enter the online state. In this state, all of the movement of the NPCs was rendered, making them act as regular NPCs from any other game, exploring, fighting, and looting. But whenever an NPC was outside of the 150-meter range or just in a different location, they wouldn't despawn like in other games. Instead, they would continue living. Of course, for performance reasons, in offline mode the NPC behavior would be heavily simplified. Instead of rendering their every step, Stalkers would jump from one tile to another. If an enemy was encountered, instead of rendering the full combat between the two, the game would just use RNG to determine who wins. This is one of the key aspects of A-Life that allowed the game to feel unique and alive. Most often, the players would find themselves discovering the consequences of a battle, finding bodies of various mutants and stalkers, knowing whoever won the battle is still out there on his journey. I don't want to go into too much detail regarding the various activities stalkers could perform, as there's simply too many of them. And since we've all played the original trilogy, we all know what the NPCs are capable of. The so-called A-Life 2.0 in Stalker 2 is the biggest downgrade in video game history. An intricate and extremely detailed system was replaced with a spawner engine. The way this system functions in Stalker 2 is that in a radius of around 100 meters around the player, a group of stalkers or mutants is spawned in. Then they start moving towards each other until they meet the player and try to kill him, or another hostile group and try to kill them. But the funniest thing happens once the NPCs are done with this little activity. They wander around aimlessly and despawn. That's right, the new and improved A-Life is a random event generator that spawns and then despawns random NPCs to create the illusion of a world bustling with activity. In previous games, you often saw the consequences of a battle. In Stalker 2, you will never see the result of a confrontation between Stalkers, because they just never happen. Although this was before the incredible patch 1.5, that finally, 8 months after the game's release, allowed Stalkers to keep existing in offline mode. Now with this incredible change, the world would feel much more lived in and have more encounters, right? Wrong. To be honest, I think this patch made everything even worse than before, because now the world feels even more empty than before. In addition, the activities Stalkers can perform while being in offline mode are extremely limited. The only thing NPCs can do is camp at a certain spot for hours on end without moving, and sometimes go and scout the areas around this camp. Of course, if they encounter another hostile group of Stalkers, they will fight them, but that's all. There is no artifact hunting, no going in and out of the base for resupply, no massive confrontations between Stalkers, and no migrations from one side of the map to the other. The NPCs seem to mostly stay in the same area where they were. NPCs also forget about the player's existence once they exit online mode. Patch 1.5 was certainly a step in the right direction, but now it creates a dissonance between moments where the game spawns in NPCs and where they come via A-Life. There are a lot of places where Stalkers spawn behind you once you enter a building. The most notable example are the army warehouses. Once you enter the armory, a group of mercenaries will spawn outside. So despite improvements being made to A-Life, the game is still spawning enemies right behind your back. Even with those improvements, the world feels extremely dead and uninteresting to explore. Instead of being a basic spawner engine, we now have a spawner engine with some extra steps. Alright, so right before releasing this video, I decided to go back into Stalker 2 and check out the new updates to see if A-Life was actually improved, if there were some noticeable changes. And well, this is just amazing. As soon as I spawn in, there's already a group of mutants right inside the Palace of Culture who came out of nowhere, and the Stalkers who are supposed to fight them are glitched out and can't even move. This is just peak. 1 year after its release, there was no progress made whatsoever. Stalkers were constantly interacting with the world and each other. Shadow of Chernobyl had an entire leaderboard with all the NPCs based on their rank and how many NPCs they have killed. By far my favorite feature from all of the Stalker games. You could see NPCs become stronger and upgrade in real time. Although this effect was even better when you saw it in person. Let's use Call of Pripyat for instance. You could meet a Stalker in Zaton, and then after numerous hours of gameplay, there was a chance that you might meet the same exact Stalker in Pripyat with completely new equipment. This created an amazing feeling. NPCs also could go on their own adventures, survive and upgrade their equipment. Every single time you saw a Stalker leave the base after playing a tune on his guitar, you knew he might not come back. He might get killed in the process, or become even stronger and move to a further location. I can't stress this enough. You could spy on Stalkers with no clip for hours and it wouldn't get boring. In Stalker 2, NPCs never leave their bases. They are static NPCs who stay at the same exact spot. Sure, the OG games also had static NPCs, but these were few and far between, to avoid the game from getting softlocked. The NPCs in Stalker 2 are just empty shells that act as basic enemies. A-Life is completely absent. I still can't believe people say that these are improvements regarding the A-Life system of the game. My biggest disappointment with A-Life in Stalker is that it was advertised as an improvement to the original, like a better and greater version of the AI. But in reality, it became a soulless and basic system devoid of any individuality. It's literally a spawner engine. Now, once again, when I thought about making this video, I wanted to underline some small problems in A-Life and compare to other projects. But it's even worse than before. Than it was in the very first game back in 2007. I'm not even mentioning Oblivion Lost Remake, which I still, to this day, consider to have the best A-Life system out of any Stalker game or mod. Stalker 2 has a long way to go in terms of A-Life, and I seriously think it will never achieve the same level as it was in the original trilogy. This is mainly due to the usage of Unreal Engine 5 instead of the X-Ray engine. Although human NPCs are not the only inhabitants of the zone who are affected by A-Life, as we also have the various mutants of the zone. At this point, the A-Life section was supposed to end, but I just couldn't let it go. I know I said that I wouldn't play on the most recent patch, but I did it. God damn it, I came back and played a combined total of 20 hours on the newest patch, and to my horror, the situation is even worse than I thought. It has been a year since the game's release, and nothing has changed. All the footage I've used before still perfectly portrays the game's current state. The entire explanation about the game spawning in NPCs is entirely correct. When reloading the same exact save file and running 200 meters forward, I was seeing groups of NPCs spawning in. Here we have nothing, then I reload and there's a group of Stalkers fighting. Another example. Load once, there's no one. Load another time, now there are Lunars in this area. The range of the NPC spawns was simply increased, so it's not as noticeable as before. That's the only difference. I've also understood that the combat hasn't changed a bit, still extremely lackluster. NPCs are blind, they still take too long to react and have insane aim. Here's a clip of me recompleting this ward section. But now, on the newest patch, there's barely a difference. The NPCs are still, a year later, complete idiots. I really hoped the game would change for the better, but it stayed the exact same. Truly makes you wonder, what was changed in all of those patches? Let's compare every single mutant one by one, and believe me, there are things to see. Blind dogs are one of the most common mutants of the zone. They usually travel in packs and prefer to use a hit-and-run tactic, by biting the enemy and then running away. To be honest, it was quite difficult to remake those enemies poorly. Dogs attack just like their old versions, travel in packs and have rather low health. However, they lack some small features that were present in other games. These features are the same for every mutant of the zone, and it really shows the immense lack of detail in Stalker 2. My main criticism of the mutants in Stalker 2 is that they just don't interact with their surroundings. They appear as NPCs that were just spawned in with the sole purpose of hindering the player's progress. Every single mutant in previous games had its own unique idle animation. When a mutant was outside of battle, he would just chill. Chimeras would scratch their necks, Snorks would look around for new victims, and dogs would sniff the air to find nearby prey. This made mutants feel more alive. They also, like human NPCs, can have a moment of rest. This feature was also beneficial as it could indicate if the mutant spotted you or not. Another feature I really liked about mutants in Stalker is how they react to pain. Let's take blind dogs for example. When a dog receives a certain amount of damage, it starts to limp around. Furthermore, if the majority of the pack has been killed, the dog will retreat, trying to survive. These features give a lot of personality to simple animals. You almost feel bad for killing them. Mutants react to damage. Fleshies are unable to use one of their claws. Snorks slowly limp towards you, barely clinging to life. Pseudo-giants crawl to their prey hoping to kill it before they die. This is a wonderful feature, both from a realism and gameplay perspective. Enemies in Stalker don't have health bars, so features like these are crucial for understanding how much health an enemy has left. Not only that, but these unique animations add up to the immersion and realism of the world. I mean, if only you saw my face when I witnessed a dog dragging the body of a stalker it has just killed. Small features like this make enemies feel special. There are not just some random NPCs who are marked as enemies. This gives so much more character to various mutants of the zone, making them stand out from regular enemies in other games. I got a bit carried away with the blind dogs, so let's discuss another prominent mutant of the zone, the Flesh. Flesh was always this type of mutant you didn't really pay attention to. They were the least aggressive enemy in the zone, which highlighted their animal of origin being regular domestic pigs. Notice how I said were. In Stalker 2, Fleshers are extremely dangerous, not just charging but leaping at you to deal great damage. This sudden spike of aggression, for me at least, kills the entire point of Fleshers as an enemy. I've always saw them as an example that no matter how much anomalies and radiation affects animals, they will always remain loyal to their not mutated counterparts. It just made sense that Fleshers are the least aggressive mutants because they were pigs, who, compared to other inhabitants of the zone, are the least dangerous animal. But that isn't the only thing wrong with Fleshers, as their AI also received several downgrades. In the original trilogy, Fleshers were always traveling in groups. Now, what's interesting about that is their coordination. Some groups of Fleshers could be led by an alpha Flesh. Normally, just like in the case of blind dogs, upon killing a member of their pack, other Fleshers would start to panic and run in random directions. But with the presence of an alpha, they wouldn't do that. Once again, small features like these really help out to flesh out the mutants. I'm sorry, please don't click off the video, making them feel more real. Of course, none of this is present in Stalker 2. Instead, Fleshers charge at you head on, which is very similar to the behavior of another type of mutant. Boars were always one of the most dangerous early game mutants. They're extremely territorial and dangerous. Surprisingly enough, they're very weak in Stalker 2. It feels like Fleshers switched with boars, because instead of being a threat that must be immediately responded to, they just, well, die. Mutant health is another major balancing issue in Stalker 2 that somehow hasn't been fixed yet. Every mutant who can be considered as stronger than average is a complete bullet sponge. And I'm not talking about pseudo-giants or chimeras. Even bloodsuckers and previously mentioned Fleshers eat buckshots like it's nothing. Now, this problem was apparent by simply playing the game, but after completing the original trilogy, after playing Stalker 2, I finally get what the problem is. Mutant health varies depending on the difficulty. In previous games, the health of mutants stayed more or less the same on all difficulties. This made the game more consistent, but also made sure everything is well balanced. Overall, on higher difficulties when fighting mutants, the main worry was their tremendous damage in exchange for rather low health. If you knew how to dodge the mutants and were careful, you would win the fight. In Stalker 2, mutants have way too much health and almost undodgeable attacks. The funniest part is that on day 1 after Stalker 2 released, Grok himself made a mod to decrease enemy health. Then, by sheer coincidence, the next patch decreases every mutant health, except the strongest mutants like pseudo-giants and chimeras. This has to be the worst decision in video game history. The biggest bullet sponges haven't been nerfed. Now, I knew the mutant health was bad, but I didn't know it would be this awful. Previously, 2 gauss rifle shots were enough to kill a pseudo-giant. So I decided to do the same experiment. 1 gauss rifle and 1 pseudo-giant. That is 15 headshots from a gauss rifle to kill 1 pseudo-giant. That is insane. Despite the fact that the gauss rifle is weaker in Stalker 2, I think that it's safe to say that the pseudo-giant in Stalker 2 has 7 times the health of a pseudo-giant from previous games. Not only do mutants have tons of health, which makes fighting them extremely long and annoying, but they also have extremely strange and outright undodgeable attacks. But we'll talk about that later when analyzing every mutant one by one. As for the boars themselves, Unlike other mutants, they have barely any health. In previous games, they seemed like bullet sponges because the head was heavily armored. Instead of shooting them head on, you had to jump away and try to shoot their back, as it was much weaker. Despite being a very basic weak spot used in various other games, it's still a great way to force you to change your playstyle and to make the gameplay more varied. Another important point I wanted to mention are the mutant reskins. The majority of enemies look very similar to the older versions, but boars are completely different. They not only look like regular basic boars, they don't have the unique appearance with various body parts being changed or even duplicated. In Stalker 2, they appear to have lost all individuality, looking like a boar from any other game. And the same problem applies to the blind dogs. Now they have fur, even though they're supposed to be hairless, and for some reason the albino variants are completely missing. The next mutant on the list are pseudo-dogs. Now it's kind of hard to compare them to Stalker 2 because they just don't exist. For some unknown reason, pseudo-dogs are completely missing from the game. This is a complete mystery to me because they were essentially a reskin of blind dogs, having slightly better stats than regular dogs. What really bothers me is that Psy-Dogs are in Stalker 2, so all the devs had to do was take the model of the Psy-Dog and give it the AI of blind dogs, and maybe change the size of the enemies. That's it. It's that simple. As I said, it's almost a reskin of blind dogs. While we're on the topic of pseudo-dogs, let's discuss their much rarer and much more dangerous counterparts, Psy-Dogs. Now, I'm really running out of ways of saying that mutants are ridiculous and overpowered in this game. Previously, Psy-Dogs could spawn small packs of wolves that you had to shoot to find the real enemy. In Stalker 2, Psy-Dogs summon an entire army of enemies. The worst part is that the spawn cooldown was greatly decreased. So while you clear all the illusionary mutants, the Psy-Dog can summon even more of them. Of course, the logical strategy is to identify the real enemy and then just shoot him while ignoring everything else. But this strategy also proves to be futile, as when a Psy-Dog spawns, it teleports. Now, I'm not sure about this mechanic, but it appears that Psy-Dogs switch places with a different fake dog once they finish summoning. Of course, I'm not certain this is how they work, but there might be another explanation as to why they suddenly appear to be somewhere else. The fake dogs they summon, which are Psy hallucinations, can take shots, despite the fact that they get one-tapped. Due to the Psy-Dog spawning in so many of them, they can tank a good chunk of damage. Overall, Psy-Dogs became extremely overwhelming. I understand that the developers wanted to create this sort of hide-and-seek gameplay with the mutant, but this is not the way to do it. There are just too many dogs that spawn. Furthermore, catching the summoner once or twice won't end the fight, because every mutant has titanium plates under their skin, and according to what I've seen, can most likely survive a nuke with this amount of health. So let's switch to an enemy who never had much health. Tushkanos are little mutated jerboas. Similarly to Psy-Dogs, they try to swarm the player. Obviously, rodents get insta-killed by literally anything. The main concern you had about rodents is their speed and small size, which makes them really hard to hit. Paired with great damage, despite looking like trash, they were rather dangerous enemies. At least that's how it was in Stalker. For some reason, out of all mutants, rodents actually received some heavy nerfs. Instead of immediately rushing towards the player in hordes, they kind of run around in circles, sometimes coming closer to attack. This removes the entire strength of these mutants, being able to rush the enemy all at once and deal tremendous damage. In Stalker 2, they act more on their own, taking leaps at the player one by one instead of all at once. So before, their behavior was more similar to rats from Stalker 2, trying to take the player with numbers. And thanks to their small size and formidable damage, they were a great threat. Now they're just annoying to fight because they take huge leaps and usually run in circles around the player instead of charging on them. Basically, rodents went from a rather scary enemy to a minor inconvenience. But this is nothing compared to how bloodsuckers were butchered in Stalker 2. Bloodsuckers are a legendary mutant. lurking in the dark corners of the zone, being ready to take anyone who's foolish enough to wander the underground tunnels of Agroprom or various laboratories. Bloodsuckers don't have much health and are quite vulnerable, but they are masters of stealth. Their skin allows them to turn completely invisible to the human eye. Their tactic consists of trying to go around the player and using their paralyzing tentacles to instantly kill their target. Not only that, but they also can jump on an unsuspecting stalker. This creates a very interesting dynamic. Despite having low protection, they manage to adapt and become one of the most dangerous mutants of the zone. I like the idea of Bloodsuckers. The fact that they have a stealth takedown, an ability that is usually solely exclusive to the player, is very interesting. As I said before, Bloodsuckers don't have much health, but thanks to their invisibility, high speed and behavior, they become very difficult enemies to kill. Obviously, the strength of Bloodsuckers is stealth. They always try to get the jump on the player whenever it's possible. If they get spotted, Bloodsuckers immediately become invisible and rush towards their target, trying to get around them and use their devastating attack. What do they do in Stalker 2? That's right, a mutant who relies on stealth, who can't win a one-to-one encounter, screams to notify the target he's here, and what's even funnier, Bloodsuckers decloak when they scream. This removes the entire point of this mutant. How can they sneak up on the player if they let the entire zone know they're here? Furthermore, their style of battle was changed. Bloodsuckers no longer have their suck ability, which makes them much less scary. Moreover, their stealth aspect is completely ignored, as now you can see the Bloodsucker's cloak anywhere. The entire point was that you had to guess where they are, using your surroundings. Now Bloodsuckers behave like other mutants, simply charging you head on. The unique style of battle and individuality of these mutants is completely gone. In previous Stalker games, fighting Bloodsuckers was scary, exciting, and memorable. Now Bloodsuckers are just annoying to fight. The stun mechanic isn't a real stun and is just made to slow you down. The player can now be knocked down, which makes you feel sluggish and slow, because the game takes away your controls. In the end, Bloodsuckers just became another basic enemy with lots of health, and a unique cloak skill that's completely useless. This is the most popular mutant in the game, who was loved for his strength, creepiness, and unique style of battle. Now is just a shadow of himself. What's more insulting is that the Bloodsucker is the very first mutant you have to fight, which just shows that they're no longer this mysterious and terrifying presence unique to the underground tunnels of the zone. It's just another foe, another mutant whose sole purpose is to prevent the player from progressing the story. Even Bloodsucker nests look worse. Now there's just 3 of them in a giant room. Meanwhile, in Call of Pripyat, there was barely any room for you to walk. I actually got scared when completing this section despite having already done it. The visuals also became worse. Old Bloodsuckers look like rotting corpses with their brains peeking out, adding a sense of mystery and terror. There were also different types of Bloodsuckers with unique skins depending on their environment. In Stalker 2, all of this is gone. I think it's safe to say, without any exaggeration, that Bloodsuckers were absolutely destroyed and butchered in Stalker 2. As if someone tried to replicate their success simply from looking at the enemy, having never played the games or understood why they work so well. But don't worry, it gets even worse. Another enemy who suffered a similar fate are poltergeists. These enemies were even more mysterious than Bloodsuckers, mostly because they only appeared in underground laboratories, and some of them, like pyrogeists, were encountered only once during a playthrough. This air of mystery created a great fear of the unknown that persisted while fighting the enemy. Upon entering the poltergeist's range, your screen changed color, making it harder to see and understand what's happening. But the scariest effect of the poltergeists were his telekinetic abilities. As multiple objects began floating in the room, you didn't know which one will attack you first. In addition, older versions of poltergeists attacked much faster than in the sequel, and this is the main problem I have with poltergeists in Stalker 2. In addition to becoming regular enemies, it's the second mutant of the tutorial, and losing their air of mystery, poltergeists also became much slower and less dangerous to fight. Once again, a scary and unique enemy whose encounter you would remember for a long time is now just a regular mutant of the zone. One enemy who brings more pity than hate are zombified stalkers. Upon suffering severe brain damage due to long-term psi exposure, they lose all signs of intelligence. Only sometimes can you hear them mumbling something about their past life. But Stalker 2 completely changed the concept of zombified enemies, as now the bodies of long-dead stalkers can be resurrected. How? The entire point of zombies was that they weren't the usual undead we're accustomed to seeing in the media. Essentially, zombified stalkers are just severely brain-damaged humans, but they are still human and still alive. This makes no sense. Even if psi emissions could suddenly revive a human being, they wouldn't be able to do basic actions because when the human body dies, most specifically the brain, it suffers severe damage. So this feature makes no sense in terms of lore and realism. But the worst part has to be the fact that they no longer speak. Once again, the enemy has lost all individuality. Before, you actually felt bad for the zombies. By hearing their mumblings, you could find out a lot of things about their lives, family, and goals. Each of them had a story to tell, which was adding to the immersion and atmosphere of the game. Thankfully, at least one mutant stayed more or less the same. Snorks are prominent mutants in the Stalker franchise. The simple idea that a human could behave like a savage animal is absolutely terrifying. Overall, Snorks are fine. They're a bit easier than before, mostly due to the fact that they don't do their leap attack much often. But the idea and concept was preserved. I especially like that you can't move after a Snork's attack, as if they hit your legs, which is good and makes them scarier. Notice how this move seems to be more fair than the Bloodsucker's one, that makes you fall to the ground, despite both having the same purpose of stopping the player. That's because you're still in control. There aren't any animations that stop you from dodging or shooting. Speaking of animations, let's talk about the controller, or at least what's left of him. The controller was one of the most terrifying enemies in Stalker, let alone his introduction in every single game was bringing fear. The main ability of the controller is his Psybolt, and this attack was changed so much it's not even funny anymore. The old Psybolt was filled with so much strength. It was very sudden and could easily scare you if you didn't know where the controller was. Upon getting hit with the controller's Psy attack, the camera was spinning uncontrollably. This feature, despite looking a bit weird, did a very good job at disorienting the player. When you came back, you didn't know from which direction you got hit. This made fighting controllers very dangerous, as they could easily stun lock you using their Psybolts. Another unique feature of this attack were the faded images of skulls or faces that appeared in front of you. You didn't see them really often, and I think this added even more surprises when getting attacked by a controller. The second mechanic this mutant had was some sort of Psy aura that surrounds the controller, not letting you get close to him. In Stalker 2, the aura appears to be still present, although due to how Psy effects were reworked, it is barely even a threat. The Psybolt was also heavily nerfed. I mean, now it just looks lame. It's not even scary, but more annoying. In the original trilogy, the Psybolt really felt like something terrifying. You could hear the charge slowly building up, the sudden and fast, piercing, resonating sound. It really felt like your brain got shot with something very powerful, something that you cannot understand. Of course, I could continue explaining how great controllers were before, but to save time, here's a clip of me fighting him at point-blank range. This is not normal. In previous games, you couldn't even get close to a controller, let alone kill him without any repercussions. The new controller does a Psybolt and then just wanders around as if you weren't even there. I really don't understand what's happening with the mutants in this game. On one hand, we have extremely powerful and unfair bullet sponges, but on the other, we have previously dangerous enemies becoming a laughingstock who can't even attack the player. Although there is a third type of mutant in this game, the extremely annoying ones. Like the Burr in the OT, yeah, I had enough of saying original trilogy. Burrs were really annoying. zapping your stamina and then taking your weapons. Well, Stalker 2 actually upgraded these mutants, making them even more annoying. Now a burr can take your weapon at any moment, which is just great. But what's even better is that when he takes it, the gun can fall through the textures and get lost forever. Furthermore, the telekinetic shield lasts for way too much time, and also the mutant can attack while having the shield up. The entire point was that he prioritized defense over offense, because both his hands were used to make the shield. To be fair, the Mega Midget got a new skill that allows him to shoot from weapons found on the ground, which would have been cool if it worked properly. Like every normal person, I thought that by unloading the guns, they wouldn't shoot. I was wrong. Instead, you have to loot the guns for them to stop shooting. But that's a bit problematic because you become over-encumbered. Overall, the burr became not more powerful but simply more annoying to fight, as now you have to wait for his shield to go down and hide from his guns. This mutant actually became easier because he lost his kinetic bolt ability, which dealt huge damage and forced you to stay away. The Chimera is one of the most dangerous mutants of the zone, and she falls in the aforementioned overpowered mutant category. Before, chimeras were already pretty scary. You had to have complete concentration, dodging her attacks and making sure you don't run out of stamina. The main attack of the Chimera is the jump. Now, once you got the hang of it, chimeras could be easily dodged. Let her jump, then shoot her while she's looking at you. Then just repeat this process again and again. In Stalker 2, chimeras don't jump, they bunny hop. This is actually insane. I have no idea what happened to this mutant, but she became really powerful. I think it's because chimeras now jump immediately after performing another jump, which allows them to easily catch up to you. Another factor that makes fighting almost impossible is that stamina in Stalker 2 is absolutely minuscule. You jump 3 times and that's it. This two-headed train is already in your face. I will repeat again. Why not leave the Chimera how she was? The old mutant will be much harder in Stalker 2 because of the decreased stamina and absurd health. At this point I'm getting tired of saying the same thing, so let's move on to the final and most powerful mutant in the zone. Pseudo-giants were always a very memorable mutant, not only thanks to their strength but also memorable appearance. The main attack they used in the OT was the ground pound, forcing you to always stay away from him. Now, I'm not gonna try to explain his attacks in Stalker 2 and how he's changed. I'm just gonna say that this queso looking guy is undodgeable. He still has a ground pound attack when he jumps in the air, and it's impossible to dodge. That's it. I really don't understand how to no-hit this mutant. I think the main problem that a few mutants have, but is very apparent with the pseudo-giant, are attacks that make you fall down. Attacks that put you in an animation. None of this was present in the OT, probably because the game is too old for that, but also to not disrupt the gameplay flow. When the game takes away the player's controls, it makes the fight feel very slow and weak, especially if it's an enemy like the pseudo-giant who spams these types of attacks. Of course, we also have the problem that this piece of meat dies after 15 Gauss rifle shots. But every mutant in this game is a bullet sponge, except boars, who are the only mutant who need to have a lot of health. How do you mess up this bad? So, to recap everything I said in the past 6 pages of script, the mutants in Stalker 2 are horrendous. They have lost all sense of uniqueness and individuality. Special animations, mechanics, behavior, and immersive details are completely absent. Every mutant had different relations with each other. Some would attack others or leave them be. This behavior is demonstrated only once in Stalker 2. The A-Life system that affected mutants was creating unique encounters between mutants and stalkers alike. But the main criticism I have with Stalker 2 is that you genuinely don't want to fight mutants. In previous games, you had to learn how to hunt various mutants. The better were your skills, the more money you could gain. But in Stalker 2, mutants are a waste of time. They have lots of health and unfair attacks. Already by fighting them, you spend lots of medkits and ammo boxes. In the patch 1.5, the ability to loot mutants was added. Of course, I could talk about how we can have different mutant parts for the same mutant, or that they could have been different price pools depending on the faction you're selling them to, but whatever, at least we can loot mutants now. Although what I don't like is how instead of focusing on real problems mutants have, the studio adds mechanics that weren't so necessary. Call of Pripyat didn't have this feature and it's still a good game because of the way mutants worked. Mutants could be easily defeated if you knew what you were doing. Even though mutants in Stalker 2 drop their parts, there's still no point in fighting them because of how much ammo you lose. And all of this could have been solved if the difficulty of the game worked like in Call of Pripyat, increasing the mutants' damage but not touching their health, making fights much more interesting and definitely not boring or annoying. But these were mutants that we could compare. Now let's talk about new mutants. Well, they're not really new, because we've already seen two of them in various mods and old versions of the games, but finally we have an official release. Cats work just like they were intended to. Having the ability of mimicking human voices, they can lure unsuspecting stalkers into a trap. I'm glad we finally see this feature being implemented, as I don't know any mods that actually managed to create this unique feature. The only problem this mutant has is, of course, the health. Cats are already pretty fast, jumping around all the time, so it would make sense to make them really weak. Otherwise the mutant is pretty good, having various unique mechanics and the ability to trick players. Another new mutant are the rats. In previous games they didn't really do anything, they just could stand up. In Stalker 2, rats try to swarm the player with their numbers. To be honest, it's absolutely terrifying to see this group of rats coming towards the player. It increases this sense of danger due to being overwhelmed. The only problem I have with these mutants is that one grenade instantly deletes them, which makes rats a very easy enemy to defeat. Another annoying feature is that rats respawn incredibly quickly and out of nowhere. The third mutant we've never seen before. It's a mutated deer, and I don't think it's a cut enemy from any of the games, although that doesn't mean it's a good enemy. Just like every mutant that's bigger than a dog, it has tons of health, and a very lazy mechanic. The deer is a basic spawner enemy. He generates weak enemies like dogs and boars, and also rodents. I don't think I have to explain why spawner enemies are annoying and a very lazy way to make an enemy. The deer relies on other mutants, but as we've seen before, the other mutants are pretty lackluster, so the enemy also becomes trash. Now when I first thought about this video, I wanted to do the usual thing, of highlighting the weird design choices of certain enemies and propose what can be improved. But the mutants turned out to be so bad, the only tip I have is to bring back the old mutants. I think I've already explained in great detail why exactly mutants in previous games worked so well. In Stalker 2, they simply behave like regular NPCs that you need to kill just to progress forward. Mutants don't feel unique anymore. They aren't interesting and memorable like they were in the original trilogy. We've discussed the numerous enemies you will encounter on your journey, now let's explore the various ways you can kill them. These next sections will be mostly positive, as these aspects of the game are rather well made. Gunplay in Stalker is amazing. The weapon animations are very clean and up to real life standards. You can see that the developers actually held a gun and know how it functions, something that Bethesda needs to learn. Every gun is extremely realistic and behaves like in real life. A huge improvement when compared to the original trilogy, where we had ejection ports on the wrong side. Although not all people are happy with the gun's animations. One complaint I've heard many times is that Skif throws his mags away even though he's a stalker, and while that looks weird, Stalker 2 took a more Hollywood-like approach to the story and overall identity, so it makes sense why the character reloads like in a movie. One feature that I loved from Call of Pripyat was the ability to inspect weapons while you're AFK, something that's available in Stalker 2 only during arena missions. The animations of the guns are very clean and make you feel the strength and impact of the gun. Although there are two components that allow you to feel this impact, and there are not only the gun's reaction but also the targets. But since in Stalker 2 shooting a log or a human has the same effect, it makes it harder to enjoy gunplay. Of course, the animations and recoil are great. The weapon attachments, despite not being numerous, are also very detailed. I especially like the ability to equip weapon mods on the go, paired with unique animations. Although not all is perfect with Stalker 2's weapons. The looks might be good, but the gameplay is somewhat lacking. And I think this statement perfectly describes the entirety of Stalker 2. It feels like the developers prioritize graphical improvements over in-depth mechanics and features. Advanced features like bullet weight that allow you to use an RPG as a mortar or bullets ricocheting from hard surfaces are completely absent. Although the main problem I have with guns in Stalker 2 is that there's no room for experimentation. The game features numerous weapons, all sorts of caliber. From Uzis to RPK miniguns, there are lots of guns to choose from. What I and many others have noticed is that there isn't any point to try out different types of weapons. Everyone sticks with assault rifles for human and semi-auto shotguns for mutants. Of course, I myself tried to use as many different guns as possible, but I kept on feeling that these other types of weapons are inferior to the AR and the shotgun. The game doesn't encourage variety and experimentation. I've beat the entire game while using only the Saiga shotgun because of how integral it was for fighting mutants. Same thing goes for the monolithian pistol I got in the Lesser Zone. I think this lack of balance between the weapons is due to special ammo. A firearm in Stalker 2 can have up to 4 types of ammo: basic, armor piercing, expansive, and flat. To be honest, I have no idea what the difference is between the last two because they seem to be both good against mutants. Ammo types aren't something new, we've already used them in previous Stalker titles and with great success, but in the sequel they appear to be irrelevant. At least the last two ammo types. While armor piercing ammo is abundant and often sold by traders, the other two types of ammo is extremely scarce, rarely found in stashes and sold by traders in Pripyat. The fact that these types of ammo are so rare and almost exclusive to the endgame worsened the horrible mutant HP balance. I've seen a lot of people tell me in the comments that mutant health is actually fine, all you need is to use appropriate types of ammunition, but the problem is that it's extremely rare and can be found only near the endgame. The simplification of ammo types is a real missed opportunity for me, because picking the right tools for the job was always a core part of Stalker's gameplay. The sequel ruined this idea and worsened the overall gameplay loop, especially when talking about fighting mutants. But this problem is mainly due to the mutant balance and the economy. The guns themselves are, as I already said, cool looking and very realistic. Overall, the lack of variety in playstyles is the saddest part. The game has one single meta regarding the weapons and it cannot be disputed. When you use guns other than shotguns and ARs, you feel crippled, as if you are intentionally weakening yourself. This is obviously a very bad sign, showing that the game is unbalanced and doesn't encourage experimentation. Once again, the gun details are great, on par with Escape from Tarkov, but the lack of variety is really underwhelming. Weapon balance is dependent on other important factors such as enemy execution, which is why I personally find this aspect mediocre, even though gunplay is considered by many to be the strong point of Stalker 2. Another popular aspect that received a lot of praise are anomalies, but I have a different opinion on that. Anomalies in Stalker 2 are usually regarded as the best part of the game, alongside the gunplay. But I still think they have some minor flaws that make them, in certain aspects, even worse than before. But let's start with the good stuff. I would be lying to myself if I said that Anomalies don't look good. Despite the overall graphics of the game lacking depth and detail, Anomalies seem to be very well made, similar to what we've seen in the Arrival Anomalies mod. They all have unique and upgraded looks, alongside completely new variants that are just astonishing. I'm of course talking about the new Arch Anomalies. These special anomalous areas are like its own unique little adventures, at the end of which you get a nice reward. I absolutely love the idea of special boss anomalies and the way they were implemented. It's always something gigantic like a fire whip covering the entire cooling tower, or an enormous tornado that you can see hundreds of meters away. One of my personal favorites is the fog anomaly that makes you travel through numerous copies of the same house, each being set in a different time period. Each of these anomalies are worthy of a quest like the Poppy Field. The only problem I have with Arch Anomalies is that there aren't a lot of them, although usually if I want to see more of something, this means that this aspect of the game was very well made. So I consider this as a plus. I especially like the new types of anomalies, like the bouncy ones that can be used to quickly exit a building. Overall, the visual part of the anomalies looks great, but I can't say the same thing regarding the main gameplay loop of searching for artifacts in anomalous fields. First of all, anomalies became more casual, both in terms of danger and functionality. As you probably noticed while playing, anomalies deal barely any damage, especially when you have good armor. Many people were complaining about me not showing in much detail how much damage anomalies deal, so here's a breakdown. So here is my build that I've managed to create during my first 3 hours of gameplay. This exoskeleton I got right after getting out of the lesser zone in my first 3 hours of gameplay. It's not the best, but it's still pretty good. And the artifacts don't really affect how much damage you take, but still, here they are. As you can see, I'm playing on veteran difficulty, and first of all, let's check how much damage gravitational anomalies deal. This is abysmal. I can heal this damage by using one single bandage. It deals barely any damage, it's completely worthless to avoid these anomalies. Here's another test in the fire anomaly. Now, as you can see, if I go inside it, it will deal damage quite rapidly. And it might seem like it's dealing a ton of damage, but you have to consider that right now I'm just standing in there, not moving. But in regular gameplay, you'll be just going through these anomalies, and as you can see, once you start moving, I only have to use medkits once in a while to survive. Now, of course, you might say that right now my equipment is taking a lot of damage, and while that's true, the artifact you will find in this anomalous field will cover the costs of your equipment getting damaged. Here's another test in the chemical anomaly. Once again, I'm playing on veteran difficulty. I have no chemical protection artifacts. I go inside and, well, the damage is also pretty bad. Now I have to give props to GSC. The electro anomaly does one-tap you if you don't have any protective artifacts, but as soon as you equip at least one, the damage becomes survivable, meaning you can still walk through electrical anomalies as long as you spam your medkits. Once again, I don't feel like I need to explain this, but we can easily spam medkits because they're extremely abundant in the game, being found absolutely everywhere and in every single stash. In the original, it was quite easy to get fried in an anomalous field if you weren't careful. This forced you to pay attention and slowly make your way towards the artifact. Another feature that I really liked was the damaging aura that surrounded some anomalies. Simply being close to a fire anomaly was enough for your character to start losing health. Paired with changing visuals and the enormous amounts of radiation, the game was setting an invisible timer on your character. You had to act fast before you die or your equipment gets severely damaged. In Stalker 2, the damaging aura is missing, or at least not as noticeable as before. Radiation, as we previously discussed, is also no longer a major threat, meaning you're no longer in a rush to grab the artifact and get out as fast as possible. Speaking of damage, let's discuss how they react when an NPC is inside of them. This just looks so bad. I kid you not, the first thing I thought of when I saw this animation is Fortnite. It just has this exact cartoony feeling to it. Previously, bodies were genuinely torn apart, with numerous meat chunks flying everywhere, each of them being affected by physics. In Stalker 2 we have a goofy looking animation followed by a stash magically appearing containing the loot of dead stalkers, extremely unimmersive and cartoon looking. I cannot stress this enough, we had literal skeletons lying on the ground after a living being got demolished by an anomaly. Another feature that made going through Anomalies trivial was the reaction to bolts. I know what you're asking yourself.
Who are you talking to right now?
Anomalies react to bolts just like before, and while that's true, Anomalies certainly react to bolts, they do it quite differently. In Stalker 2, Anomalies disappear for a couple of seconds after coming into contact with a bolt, unlike in the originals where bolts were used to determine the location of an anomaly, to activate it and reveal its location. The only anomaly that despawned for a couple of seconds was the Electro one. Previously, you had to navigate a maze of anomalies trying to find the right path without any obstacles. A task much harder than it looks, thanks to the previously mentioned damage auras around anomalies. In Stalker 2, all you have to do is throw a bolt and the anomaly is gone. Even gas clouds disappear once you throw a bolt in them. This trivializes searching for artifacts, as every anomaly can be countered the same exact way. Previously, getting artifacts was a challenge, finding your way through various anomalies as fast as possible while being extremely careful. For me, looting artifacts was like that one mission with landmines in Call of Pripyat, except with the added bonus of time constraint. Although despite this simplification, going through anomalies is still rather difficult, but for completely different reasons. Second, it became more annoying to get artifacts. I'm sure we all remember the neat little feature of moving artifacts from previous games. While searching for an endgame artifact, it could slowly move away from you, making it harder to obtain. Furthermore, even when you dropped certain artifacts on the floor, they would start to wobble away from you. At first, this feature was completely absent from Stalker 2, but in one of the patches, artifact movement was added, and to be honest, I wish it wasn't. As previously mentioned, artifacts slowly moved away from you. Paired with maze-like anomalous fields, this slow movement was enough to force you to deviate from your path and spend even more time in the dangerous area. In Stalker 2, however, artifacts jump from one side of the field to another, making it extremely difficult to catch them. Here's a slowed down clip to show how small the window is to catch an artifact. You genuinely have to predict pressing the button to pick it up. This makes you spend more time than usual in anomalies, but this time it's more annoying than anything, as there's no real danger. I've often found myself just sprinting through anomalies towards the artifact, ignoring everything. This is not the way you're supposed to loot artifacts. Going through anomalies must be scary, exciting and pressuring. Arch anomalies serve somewhat the same purpose, but they are a one-time event that you'll never visit again. And finally, third, the artifacts themselves were heavily nerfed. The artifact reworks have been partially covered when talking about the stamina and exploration, but every artifact received significant changes. The first and most noticeable change is that artifacts no longer display values. Instead, they've been replaced with levels ranging from low to maximum. This greatly decreases the variety of artifact effects, especially since there are tons of them. Another change I really dislike is the absence of healing artifacts. Instead, previously healing artifacts like Soul simply offer protection, which once again decreases the artifact variety and combinations. Which is amusing, because overall there are tons of artifacts, much more than previously, but most of them have the exact same effect, making them completely useless. Okay, so here's a quick demonstration of what I mean. There are 4 artifacts that give you weak radiation protection, just the exact same. Then we have 2 more artifacts that have medium radiation protection. Once again, 2 more artifacts with the same exact effects. And then here once again, Stone Blood, Stone Heart and Goldfish, they all have the same exact effect. And this reduces the artifact variety by a lot. And of course we have artifacts that, have one single stat that's different. So we have thermal protection, but without radiation, Now, of course, these artifacts are technically different, but you won't be sitting here with a straight face telling me that they're completely different and using completely different situations. No, it all boils down to the same thermal protection with tiny negligible buffs and debuffs. And that's the problem. There are more artifacts, but at the end of the day, most of them are completely identical and offer barely anything new. And this is valid for pretty much every single artifact, which is honestly pretty sad because, as I already said, they look cool. Although what I can't deny is how good they look. Every artifact has its own shape, color palette, and even unique animations. Absolutely amazing work on their designs. Whenever you get an artifact in Stalker 2, you want to inspect it because of how good it looks. But other than the looks, artifacts are a big step down when compared to previous games, missing various details, utility, and variety. Overall, Anomalies and artifact hunting became really simple, lacking numerous details and mechanics. It seems that only the graphical aspect of Anomalies were improved, while everything else decreased in depth and quality. And with the Anomalies done, we can finally move to the last section regarding the gameplay of Stalker 2, the economy. Out of all gameplay aspects, the economy received the most changes. It started as a soul-crushing and unforgivable system, but got nerfed into the ground and became extremely easy. It's a very strange way to balance the economy. At first I wanted to skip this section and just explain everything with this meme.
Твою мать, за 40 гривен штаны, блядь.
But it's not like 2 minutes will change anything, so let's see. The entire point of Stalker 2's balance was to make exploration very punishing. It is designed to create a feel of grief whenever your suit would get damaged in an anomaly or by enemies. This is a cool feature on paper, as it brings lots of emotions into the game and makes it more memorable. Although, as we previously discussed in the debuff section, carrying lots of items severely decreases your movement speed, making exploring extremely dull. And as I said, the economy forces you to loot every single item to make profit. After numerous patches, the situation has become even worse. You can easily get tons of money really quickly. The economy is completely broken. Even without selling artifacts, I always had over 100,000 coupons with me at all times. The important part is that I didn't farm for these items. I just looted everybody and stash that was nearby. The main problem stems from the weight system and stamina balance, as these mechanics are what makes carrying many items really annoying. Once again, we've already talked about this in previous section, but here we finally get the reason why we can't just leave the loot behind. There are many ways to make the player regret their mistakes. For example, in Stalker Gamma, I was often regretting going into an anomaly and damaging my equipment. I know that Gamma is not the best example of a balanced economy, but I think it showcases well how to create this feeling of unease and regret after making a mistake. Which I think is what GSC was going for, a punishing system showing the brutality of the zone. The broken economy concludes the gameplay section of the game, which is quite fitting. Now we can move on to the actual story of the game and its characters. The story of Stalker 2 puts us in the shoes of a completely new character called Skif, who is going in the zone to get a new apartment in Kiev. Amazing motivation. After being betrayed, he finds himself in Zalicia, where the player is introduced to one of the central factions of the zone, the Ward. I have to give props to GSC, they really made the Ward as unlikable as possible. Every faction member complains how they control everyone and everything, ruling over the zone with an iron fist. Their leader, Korshunov, is an extremely unlikable character, always being overly aggressive and angry. The Ward reminds me of the Brotherhood of Steel from Fallout 4. They're clearly the bad guys, being extremely militaristic and bloodthirsty, but if the player ever wants to join them, you can. Why would you ever do that? During the course of this video, I love to describe the Ward as duty on steroids, but they're even worse. in Stalker 2, the Ward is portrayed in such a negative sight that no one wants to root for them. They actively tried to destroy the zone and hold every faction at bay, unlike Duty, whose goal was to purify the zone of all its dangers, like mutants and bandits. There's no reason to pick the Ward's side, as there are no positive points or arguments towards their faction. We're also introduced to Richter, who's the only lunar with a somewhat different face. Then we make our way to Garbage, more precisely the Slag Heap. Garbage is an interesting location, as just like Zaton, both Stalkers and Bandits are living there together. This location is made even more unique by the fact that some of the Bandit members are puppets installed by Duty or Freedom. Now, after Varan gives you the quest to kill those Bandit members, and considering that you can fake their deaths or just kill Varan directly, I really thought you could change what factions are dominating over Garbage. But no, all you get for sparing them is a stash. Upon coming back to Slag Heap, after getting the scanner, you are introduced to your first important choice, followed by a cutscene where Skif reassembles an AK-47. Let's talk about the cutscenes for a bit. I can't deny the fact that they look absolutely gorgeous and extremely epic. Everything from the movement of the actors and the music during cutscenes is top notch. But the real question is, why is this in Stalker? Stalker had its fair share of cutscenes, but they weren't over-the-top Call of Duty style, with characters disassembling an AK in front of you. The cutscenes tried to be way too serious. The entire idea with Skif playing a role in deciding the fate of not only the entire zone, but also the whole world is very strange. We'll come back to this later. The weird-looking PDA points us to Wild Island, a base of ex-Monolithians. As soon as we get there, we can witness an internal conflict in the faction. Strider, from Call of Pripyat, advocates against the monolith. He promises to never come back to these ways of living. Meanwhile, Faust, one of the monolith's preachers, believes that their god is not dead, and that it is their destiny to come back under his control. This scene is amazing as it introduces us to a confrontation directly inside the faction, showing this rupture between the two types of Monolithians. When I saw this cutscene, I immediately thought of a chain of side quests where we could do something to prevent an uprising of Monolithians in the faction. Strider often talks about how they're isolated from the others, still being considered a threat. This could have been a great opportunity for the player to create a bridge between the two factions. Just like in Call of Pripyat, we could show the rest of the world that the monolith has changed and that they can be trusted. The moment I visited Noontide, I was convinced that this would be our goal with this faction. But turns out everything gets thrown out of the window because the monolith comes back. As a veteran of the series, I was really hyped about the monolith coming back. But it ruined the entire point of Noontide. Why introduce us to a faction that gets wiped out immediately afterwards? In addition, Stalker 2 is the sequel of the franchise, so it should expand on the ideas of the original and continue its story, so it makes even more sense that the monolith would be free. In Clear Sky, the monolith was omnipresent and preventing Stalkers from venturing further. In Shadow of Chernobyl, the sea consciousness controlling monolith is destroyed by STRELOK'S, marking a change in the zone. A change that's demonstrated in Call of Pripyat, where Monolithians start to doubt their god and some even become free. So logically, the continuation of these events will be the entirety of the monolith becoming free and getting slowly integrated in the Stalker community. But no, scratch that, the monolith is back. The epic comeback of the Talking Stone happens during the S.T.A.L.K.E.R mission, but before that we visit Zaton, where nothing changed. Sure, bandits and stalkers seem to be quite separated, but even in Call of Pripyat, we could betray Beard, so it's not like it's a new addition. Except this time, all of the events are orchestrated by a woman who tries to install her control over Zaton. Of course, once again, we can either side with Beard and Sultan or betray them. The outcome is the same, nothing changes, it's just that one of the traders becomes unavailable. although I have to admit the ending of this quest is pretty epic.
Stop by. This ship ain't going anywhere.
The entire questline Zaton is an introductory sequence to the swamp region, which contains Clear Sky's base. To be honest, the first impression you get after revisiting the base is astonishing. Seeing a place you could call home, now decrepit and destroyed, creates a great feeling, both nostalgic and tragic. Although the same thing cannot be said about the lore you can find out about Clear Sky. If you decide to take your time and read the incredible information you find here, you will be disgusted by what was done with the game's story. Turns out that members of Clear Sky were always working with the sea consciousness, and S.T.A.L.K.E.R was already an agent programmed to kill STRELOK'S. This is the single biggest retcon ever. With this newfound knowledge, it's easier to forget that Clear Sky even existed. The entire game makes no sense with this revelation. The first portion of the game is spent searching for clues about STRELOK'S group, because Clear Sky doesn't know anything about them. But since they work with the sea consciousness, they should be already aware of his location, making the entire first portion of the game useless. Thankfully, the second part of the game also becomes worthless. During the events in Limansk, the abandoned hospital and the CNPP, members of Clear Sky and the Monolith are constantly killing each other, and are actively trying to kill S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Which makes absolutely zero sense, because the Monolith is directly controlled by the common consciousness. So in the end, we have agents of SEACON fighting other agents of the same faction trying to kill STRELOK'S. I really feel like I don't have to explain what's wrong here, but I know there will be people defending this alternative storyline made up in Stalker 2. Why would the common consciousness destroy hundreds of their own men to convince S.T.A.L.K.E.R to kill STRELOK'S? Furthermore, they don't even have to convince S.T.A.L.K.E.R because, as was already mentioned, when he arrives at the Clear Sky base, he is already a programmed agent of SEACON. The entire Clear Sky faction dies just to make it seem more believable to S.T.A.L.K.E.R that they're enemies. Damn, SEACON really wanted to kill STRELOK'S. You might think that this is the end of the epic story revelations, but no. In fact, it is revealed to us in Stalker 2 that emissions are not controlled by sea consciousness. So the entire explanation given by Lebedev at the start of the game that emissions are used by the sea consciousness to prevent STRELOK'S from getting to the heart of the zone, and that they are destabilizing the zone itself, are all trash. Turns out it just so happens to be emissions when STRELOK'S is getting close to the CNPP. This entire plot twist completely destroys the lore and story of the 3 games. Thankfully, this retcon isn't heavily focused on during the main story of Stalker 2, but the simple fact that in a couple of notes, the developers can destroy the entirety of a game's lore is absolutely frightening. And it makes me wonder what other amazing story revelations are hidden in other messages found all throughout the zone. After a detour to Zaton, we get the S.T.A.L.K.E.R mission, where it is revealed to us a ton of lore about artifacts, anomalies, and experiments. First of all, the scientists at S.T.A.L.K.E.R developed a cheat engine to spawn in artifacts and anomalies, which makes me wonder, why do stalkers still look for artifacts and who they sell them to, if S.T.A.L.K.E.R can produce an indefinite amount of them. Another amazing story revelation was that artifacts don't work outside of the zone, which makes the entire point of searching for artifacts to then sell them on the mainland irrelevant, as they simply don't work. But compared to other retcons, this is negligible. We also find out that S.T.A.L.K.E.R spawned an anomaly in Skif's house, which is why it got destroyed. But the artifact that Skif found is so special that it's directly linked to the zone and will allow scientists to get infinite energy from the generators. What the actual... Now, to be honest, I'm not an expert in the lore of Stalker, but the entire idea of getting unlimited energy thanks to a super powerful artifact sounds very strange to me. Here we get two completely useless choices. The first one is related to Herman. We either kill him and never see him again, or let him go and never see him again. There's no reward, no additional dialogue or karma, nothing. The funniest part is that if you're going for the ward's ending, Herman shows up out of nowhere and the NPCs just tell you that, oh, it was all an illusion, you didn't actually kill him. So from the start, you had no choice whatsoever. But this choice isn't important because the buttons aren't gigantic. The second important event makes us choose between Noontide and the Ward. Fun fact, it doesn't matter whose side you pick, the monolith will still be revived, destroying Noontide. You might think it's important to side with Noon, that way you're sure to not get the Ward ending. But that's also fake, as near the end of the game, we get the option to join the Ward. After destroying hundreds of their soldiers and fucking up all of their plans, we can just shake hands with Korshunov and forget about everything that happened. Upon escaping Circa, all hell breaks loose. The monolith comes back and starts attacking everyone, just like in the good old days. This is another problem I have with the story of Stalker 2, as it heavily relies on nostalgia. Remember how Sidorovich gave you side quests in Cordon? Well, how about you do the same exact quest again? Remember the ending of Shadow of Chernobyl? Well, we remade them, but in first person. Remember the PDA STRELOK'S held? Well, it's back. And if you didn't get it the first time, here it is again. But this time when STRELOK'S dies, he does the same animation as in the intro. Oh my god. This is so cheap and just brings more questions than answers. Why does Sid have the same problems as before? Did he really not learn anything? How can we see memories of STRELOK'S that didn't even happen? These are not canonical endings. Did Circa open a portal to a parallel reality or something? Why does STRELOK'S still carry his goddamn PDA with him? Is he still trying to complete the quest? This makes no sense. I'm not saying that the sequel doesn't need to have references to previous games. It's the sequel after all. But it shouldn't be like this. The ending of the Three Captains quest is pretty good. Visiting the base of Clear Sky feels amazing and tragic. The revelation scene of the Doctor's true identity is very well done, because instead of outright copying the original, it expands on the game's world, but we'll cover that a bit later. Another problem I have is that Stalker can't let go of its characters. Okay, Beard, Sultan, Voronin, Miklucha, Sidorovich, all of these characters are important and it makes sense why they didn't move on or just die. But why are all the side characters here? Wolf, Grey, even the Hunter are still here? These are side characters not important to the story of the game. You can barely even talk to them. To include these characters was a mistake, because their absence would show changes that happen in the zone, the fact that stalkers come and go, which is one of the central themes of Stalker 2. Once again, it makes you ask unnecessary questions, like why is Wolf still in the rookie village after 10 years? What's next? You're gonna tell me that Scar survived? Oh yeah, that's right. We interacted a little bit with the Spark faction up until this point. Sure, we did some quests in Zaton and met with Scar in Wild Island, but it's only now in the second portion of the game that we can join them with the Duga raid. At first, Spark is presented as a copycat of Freedom, but only in the late stages of the game their true purpose is revealed to us. Turns out Scar and his friends want to create some sort of zone matrix that contains the minds of everyone who died here. This is a very strange idea and something that wasn't mentioned at all during the events of previous games. Not only is their idea equivalent to believing that your virtual AI girlfriend is real, but it also heavily affects the lore of the game. Like now we have ghosts of stalkers living in the zone. But the main reason I don't like Spark is Scar. And here we move on to the holy trio of stalkers and how each of these characters were flipped, contorted, and transformed to be completely different people. The most noticeable changes happen to Scar. Every cutscene with this man is extremely cringe-inducing, with the mercenary jumping and screaming all the time. One would think that his brain got completely fried from the emissions, but the reality is much more complicated. We've already talked about the biggest retcon that destroyed the entire lore of Clear Sky. So, following these events, the devs decided to completely decimate the entire story of Clear Sky as well, because who cares anyway? The biggest surprise was of course to see Scar alive and well. As I previously stated, I'm not an insane lore master of the Stalker games, but something tells me that when you're in the middle of nowhere with no cover and there's a super powerful emission happening, you're pretty much dead, even if you're Scar. Instead, Scar became brainwashed like STRELOK'S, but received the memories of Marshall, which is why he acts like the Joker. I hope I'm not the only one who finds this plot twist to be completely unnecessary and outright idiotic. It would be better if Scar just stayed dead. He went through an incredible character assassination, becoming a completely different character. The same thing can be said about STRELOK'S himself. I strictly remember when during the ending of Call of Pripyat, STRELOK'S emerged and told the military that he wants to destroy the zone. Furthermore, during the events of the game, he becomes one of the leading figures at S.T.A.L.K.E.R. So, based on what we've seen in previous games, STRELOK'S is against the zone and its hardships, helping scientists research it and actively trying to get rid of it. But all of a sudden in Stalker 2, the Legend of the Zone considers the zone to be a holy grail that needs to be protected. Additionally, all of STRELOK'S efforts are undone once we find out that the sea consciousness survived. Kind of, I'm not really sure if they're a pre-recorded message or an actual living entity because different endings show them differently. I don't necessarily hate the idea of a character's goals and beliefs changing, but it has to be explained. We need to see how the character evolves and changes his point of view. STRELOK'S just says, yeah, now I'm like that, without any explanation. Sure, he tells us that the zone gave him a new life, but when did he realize that? What made him realize that? Is it when he was working at S.T.A.L.K.E.R? None of these questions are answered, and even if they are, they weren't delivered properly. Thankfully, the only character who doesn't go through this immense character assassination is Z.K.R, but that's mostly because we speak to him only 2 times during the entirety of the game and thus don't really get to see his point of view. Nevertheless, the simple existence of Z.K.R in Pripyat is already strange, as he also left the zone, although here it's much easier to explain, as he previously lived in Pripyat, so we can say that he just got very emotional and nostalgic, just like me when playing this game. One thing you've probably noticed is that at first the story section was linear, and now it went all over the place. And that's not because I don't know how to write scripts, but it's a perfect representation of how I felt after completing the S.T.A.L.K.E.R mission. It was genuinely difficult for me to rebuild the events of the second part of the game, because they're so all over the place. So in the first section of the game we started in the Lesser Zone, then we went to Garbage, Wild Island, did some quests there, then Zeton with some more quests, and then we take a detour to the swamps and arrive at S.T.A.L.K.E.R. For now the path is very linear and makes sense, we explore each location one after the other. Now look what happens after S.T.A.L.K.E.R. From S.T.A.L.K.E.R we have to go to the Lesser Zone to do a raid there, then restock, then to the Dugas, then to Malachite, then to the chemical plant to find out Faust's entire lore, then back to the Dugas and back to Malachite. And from there we have to go to the Red Forest, skip Yantar, skip the truck cemetery, who cares? We do some quests here, this is my favorite part. We have to go to Cordon, this is literally the other side of the map, then to the Burnt Forest. From there, would you kindly walk 2 kilometers to Malachite, where we get captured and sent to the chemical plant, from which we have to go directly to Yanov. What is this? This looks like the drawing of a schizophrenic person. Imagine if the story path was something like this. This is so much simpler and similar to how it was before, straight line through the areas of the game. Or maybe if they really wanted you to go 2 times to the Dugas, do something like this, I don't know. There were so many ways of making the story path less convoluted. Another factor that was making the story even more complex was the need to over-explain everything. One of the key aspects of the Stalker series were the various mysteries surrounding the zone and its inhabitants. This air of mystery created a sense of fear of the unknown that reinforced the game atmosphere and sometimes even gameplay. The need of Stalker 2 to explain absolutely every aspect of the game got rid of this feeling and ironically opened the door to even more questions. For example, remember how monolithians could stay in radioactive areas for days without any problems? No, you never thought this aspect needed explanation? Well, GSC doesn't think that. Turns out the monolith had those special regenerators with them at all times. That's right, the Medigun from TF2 is now canon in Stalker. The question I asked myself the most when playing Stalker 2 was, what are you even yapping about? The problem I have with these new additions to the lore is not that it's not canon, but just because they sound so ridiculous and over the top. The fact that Faust is actually a controller and sees the very fabric of which the zone is made of is so insane. Sure, the original games also had their fair share of weird moments like the lore of the Noosphere, but what we see in the sequel just feels too far-fetched. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks this way. I'll be eager to hear your opinion in the comments. Before going into the 4 endings of the game, I want to address what the story lacks in my opinion. A good, detailed, and in-depth look into the game's themes and characters. The central theme of Stalker 2 is supposed to be the new zone and how it can become a beautiful home for a stalker. This is exactly what Richter mentions during that one cutscene. But the problem is that we don't get to see this side of the zone. Plus, the character development is lacking and incomplete in some places. The only person who has a good character arc is Strider, and that's probably why you still remember it. Normally, every single character arc needs to be similar to his, but they feel rushed. Richter is sad because while guiding some people they died, so then after progressing through the story, he's back being a guide. The same thing for Dalin. The last moments when we see him is during that scene at the generators. We don't even know if he survived, and we definitely don't get any closure on his moral dilemma and how it affected him. As was put in the numerous reviews I watched about this game, the story is just a collection of themes to think about. None of them are explored and delved into further than the surface level. To conclude the story section, let's talk about the endings of the game. Personally, I didn't like any of the endings, mostly because they all revolve around the fate of the entire world and the zone. I think it would have been better if the story stayed more grounded. Skif is a nobody after all. The ending of Call of Pripyat was very emotional and epic, despite affecting only certain parts of the zone, which was fitting because Degtyaryov was just a soldier. He was no legend of the zone who could decide her fate. Which brings us to STRELOK'S ending. As was previously mentioned, STRELOK wants to protect the zone and will use the last spot to take full control of her. Not only does this not fit with his ideas, but he also contradicts himself. He wants the zone to be free, yet he controls her. Furthermore, this enormous quarantine of the zone will eventually lead to its downfall, as stalkers are reliant on resources like food, weapons and tools coming from the mainland. Without these resources and an influx of new stalkers, the zone will be a barren wasteland with only mutants and anomalies. Funny enough, this appears to be the ultimate endgame for every ending. SCAR's ending puts everyone in one big simulation, turning them into zombies, leaving the rest of the zone to rot. The Ward ending destroys and abuses the zone, and STRELOK'S, well, we already discussed it. The only ending that doesn't destroy the zone is Project Y, but the funny thing is that instead of the zone being ravaged, it's the rest of the world that gets decimated. I'm genuinely surprised there's no secret ending where Skif just goes full STRELOK mode and just destroys the last capsule, so no one can use it. Usually I'm a fan of bittersweet or just bad endings in video games, but here it feels completely different. I think the main problem I have with the story is that it's way too grandiose. Skif's actions affect not only the entire zone, but also the rest of the world, as if he was some sort of chosen one. Of course, it might be a personal preference thing, as I've seen many people praise the story and its development, but I personally didn't enjoy it all that much. Finally, it is time to talk about the most important section of this video that will serve as a conclusion for this 40-page essay: the atmosphere of Stalker. The key aspect and the main reason why we love this game so much. The atmosphere of the Stalker games was always unique, terrifying but beautiful, lonely but vibrant. And I feel like the atmosphere of Stalker 2 has completely lost its original charm. Many people assume the atmosphere to be created only by the game's graphics and sound design, but I disagree. In fact, I think that gameplay elements play an extremely important role in the creation of a game's atmosphere. As we've already looked over, numerous gameplay elements of the game are poorly done. And while some people in the comments consider those small details to be nitpicks, I totally disagree. These are important factors that add up to the immersion and realism of the game. Nitpicks are the fact that bushes no longer make noise when you walk through them, the fact that items don't burn in campfires, or that crows can't be shot from the sky. These are real nitpicks because they can barely affect the gameplay and immersion in any way. But the factors I've listed during the course of this entire video are important and matter. You see, the Stalker atmosphere is like a house. The base of it is made out of the setting, graphics and soundtrack. And then we have the other, still important factors like the enemy AI, mutant behavior and the reaction to their surroundings, which create the walls. And only then we have the final stage, where we have those little details that flesh out the experience and make it truly unique and unforgettable. Stalkers pleading for help when they're on the ground isn't a small feature that can or cannot be included. It's a design choice that makes you care about the NPCs and makes them feel alive. Each little detail like this immerses you into the world and creates the Stalker atmosphere. Not only those details are absent from the game, but huge aspects to consider like survival, exploration, questing and combat are also extremely poorly done. For me, Stalker 2 is like a doppelganger, a broken and distorted mirror, because on the surface, you would think it's a Stalker game. I mean, we got factions, mutants, anomalies and artifacts. But when you start going deeper and analyzing every single aspect of the game, you understand that these features are just simple imitations, without a real understanding of how and why these systems worked so well in the original. I genuinely get the feeling that the people who made Stalker 2 aren't just different developers, but they never even played the originals to begin with. In Stalker 2, the atmosphere house is not only missing its walls and roof, but also the entire foundation. The graphics are still, almost a year later, riddled with visual glitches and are extremely flat and unrealistic. The setting and any mention of the CNPP are gone, as if it never existed in the first place, even though the main story of the trilogy was based on the errors of mankind and how they can destroy their own world. The soundtrack is completely lacking and isn't even noticeable. I've especially haven't used any music from previous Stalker titles or Metro to show that creating a soundtrack similar to Stalker that gives the same feeling isn't all that hard. There are dozens of talented artists who create absolutely wonderful pieces of dark ambient that would ideally fit into Stalker. Not all is bad in this game, of course. The world design is top-notch and extremely detailed, but that's probably the only good aspect of Stalker 2. Everything else is poorly done, or worse than before. Speaking of which, you might have noticed that I barely made it in comparisons with any other apocalyptic games like Metro, Dying Light, Fallout or The Last of Us. And that's because I'm scared. If Stalker 2 is worse than its 15-year-old predecessor, I'm genuinely afraid to see how it compares to modern games of the same genre. People often say that 2 years later the game would be good and amazing, but I think this will never be the case. The problem lies not in the game's glitches, I have barely mentioned them, but in the mechanical depth of the game. Cyberpunk made a comeback because it was a good game to begin with. It had a well thought out and in-depth gameplay loop that pushed the player to learn and delve deeper into it. Every aspect of Stalker 2 is broken. It has a giant world where the only thing you can do is loot stashes with mediocre loot. It has numerous factions that aren't used during the story or gameplay of the game. It has well-made gunplay, but falls flat when looking at the overall combat, including the AI of Stalkers and Mutants. It has beautiful anomalies that serve no purpose, as half of the artifacts have the same effect and give negligible buffs at best. Every positive aspect is counterbalanced with 20 negative ones. The game lacks so many features compared to the originals, it's almost baffling. Stalker 2 is not a good game, it's mediocre at best. And that is probably my biggest problem with this game. It's not bad nor good, but somewhere in between, hence why people like it more than dislike it. But I think there's another factor to it. Stalker 2 was made for a different audience. Recently, I've watched a review of Stalker 2 by a Fallout fan who never played the originals, and guess what? He thinks the game is a masterpiece. Of course, if you've only played games that are slightly above average and don't know that it was better before, you would think this game is amazing. Finally, we move on to the section where I give my definitive review of the game. If we consider Stalker 2 to be not part of the Stalker IP, but a standalone franchise, then it would be something like a 4 or 4.5, similar to Fallout or Far Cry. But if we consider Stalker 2 to be the continuation of the legendary Stalker series, if we consider Stalker 2 to be the sequel to the original trilogy, it's awful. The sequel not only doesn't expand on the original's ideas, but also actively destroys what its predecessors had so meticulously built. I personally think that a game's identity is heavily based on its atmosphere, but in the sequel it's completely gone. Remember the quote I put at the very start of the video? The key aspect of creating a good sequel is for it to remain faithful to the original and expand on its ideas. Something that Stalker 2 doesn't even try to do. Stalker 2 doesn't feel part of the Stalker franchise. That's why I would give it a rating of 3 or even lower. The developers themselves don't even seem to understand what they're doing. Is this a reboot of the franchise or a direct continuation? Is the game a standalone project or extremely reliant on the originals? I really can't tell. The worst part is that the promotional material featured a much more realistic and immersive depiction of the zone. Although this is a topic for a completely different video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see it. And I'm off spectating the wars in the comments of this video.